Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and I'm joined today by that guy right there, Vince D'Addario, our football analyst at Irish Breakdown. And we're going to talk today, Vince, about the Notre Dame defense.
Yes.
This is going to follow the same format that we had the other day. We're going to talk about the things that now that we've got 14 practices under our belts of the practice videos plus the conversations we've had with people off the record about what we're seeing, what we're hearing, then the blue gold game. What are the things that we feel like we've learned about this defense? Mostly positives, things that we feel good about, maybe some questions that were answered, some things we felt good about that were now have been confirmed as strengths of this team. And then we'll also bring up some question marks that we still think exist. And I think that's every team has question marks in May. And so what are those things that we'll need to get figured out over the course of the summer? And then the things that will have to get answered as we go through fall camp. And so that's going to be the point of today's show. This is going to be more of a podcast video in our podcast format. So essentially what y'all have learned is we have basically two formats of our show. And this is more for the YouTube. The people on the podcast aren't listening to it live. This is more for the YouTube aspects of it. So when we do a podcast format, it is just us doing our podcast. And we're doing our podcast live. And so that way people can join. So we can have Q&A afterwards. If you have a comment or a question that you would like us to address during the podcast form, feel free to throw a super chat in there and we'll get it in there, okay? Otherwise, what we'll do is at the end of the podcast, when we're done with sort of our show, we will then open it up to the Q&A. And then you can talk about what we talked about in the show. You can talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. But obviously a lot of it will be focused on what the topic is today. Sure. So that's the format of what we're going to do, Vince. So, Vince, I think the first thing that we learned about this defense is Marcus Freeman respects the job that was done by the coaches before him. Mm-hmm. There was some carryover from what they did before, but it is very clear, even from what I viewed as a very limited defensive game plan, it was still obvious that this defense has got Marcus Freeman's DNA all over it from a conceptual standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, sure, and then from just an attitude standpoint. This is clearly already looking like a different group in some very important ways.
Well, and I like the it's funny how different styles you can have when you play defense, right? You've got the Bob Diaco kind of keep everything in front of you, base defense kind of thing, rely on your D-line, et cetera. You've got the John Tenuta, we're just going to blitz everywhere for no reason, just to wreak havoc, which was kind of my philosophy as a freshman football coach. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't coaching freshman football in high school.
Then you learn how bad that is. Yeah.
It worked well against 14-year-olds.
Right.
But and then there's the Clark Lee, which was kind of a combination of different things. And then you've got Marcus Freeman, and Marcus Freeman clearly is going to take a more aggressive approach, but a less, and I don't want this to sound like a bad thing, but a less cerebral approach. Yeah. Like he gives the guys what they need to know, and then he lets them play. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that's better or worse than what Clark Lee was doing, because clearly Clark Lee took this defense to a whole new level. There's no question about it. It's just different. And people, even non-football people who watch Notre Dame this fall, are going to notice. They're going to notice a difference from this defense. And there's a lot of the same characters out there who are going to be performing in a different way. And I think a fun way. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
I'm going to steal and kind of tinker a phrase that we're both familiar with, Finch. It's structured chaos is how I would like to look at it. Yeah. The structure is what the defense is. In their minds, from an assignment standpoint, there's a lot of structure to what they're doing. To the offense, it's going to look chaotic, which makes it difficult to handle. Mm-hmm. The difference is John Tenuta and Brian Van Gorder's systems were just chaotic, which meant a lot of blown plays, a lot of missed assignments, and a lot of those kind of things. It was unsound football. What I see from Marcus Freeman's defense, it's very sound football. But if I'm looking at it from an OC or a quarterback's point of view, it looks chaotic.
Yeah,
there's pressures coming from all over. There's line games. There's twists.
Yes.
Now, when I broke down Brian Van Gorder's defense, he did a lot of that stuff, different blitzes, but it was very unsound. It was very as an offensive coordinator, I'm thinking I'd pick that apart, I'd pick that apart, I'd pick that apart. And that's why even early in 2014, Vince, you'll remember, I was very critical of Brian Van Gorder's defense, even early in 2014 when they were having success. Because what I said was there's a lot of unsound stuff going on here that eventually teams are going to figure out and start to shred. And as we saw the second half of that year, that's exactly what happened.
I want to ask you a question about his defense, because what we heard a lot from the players and the parents and things was that it was a very complicated scheme, right? So can you explain the complicated part of this scheme in which, like, are they trying to run their defense based on what the offense is doing at the snap of the ball? You know, is it not just a call and go? Like, why was it so complicated?
So I'm going to say this. Clark Lee and Brian Van Gorder were cut from the same cloth. The difference is Clark Lee was really smart and really good at what he did, and Brian Van Gorder was not. And what I mean by that is, as we saw Coach Lee's defense evolve at Notre Dame, it became more complicated than it was early. And that's, to a degree, good coaching, because he didn't start off that way. It's like, hey, we need to make sure that everybody understands it. I also think part of the reason he got a little bit more complex in 2020, if we're being honest, is because he didn't have the same personnel he had in the back four, really, that he had early on when he had Troy Pride and Julian Love and Alohi Gilman and Jalen Elliott. He could just let those guys kind of take over and play games and shut people down. He had to protect this secondary. Well, how do you protect the secondary? You got to make sure you're always in the right calls. You have to be, more.
You have to be more perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's partly why we saw more from Coach Lee. Now, the difference is Coach Lee did it in a very sound way. It was a lot on their plates, but it was very sound. And also, there was always some continuity to his complexity. What I mean by that is there were certain principles that were complex, but they were going to carry on throughout the year. I have been told by multiple sources, including people that used to coach at Notre Dame, that Brian Van Gorder would just come out after a Wednesday practice and just throw out everything they had been working on and start over because he didn't like it.
No foundation.
That's insanity.
That's insanity.
And they would literally change the defense week after week after week, which is what do you do? You do that in the NFL.
Sure.
When that's literally your job, and that's all you do.
All day to learn things.
Right.
You have 2 hours a day with these kids, you know, to be on the field, and then X amount to be in the classroom because they have actual class and things to do. So, yeah, you can't do that in the college level.
And so with those schemes, it was a lot of if they move, if the receiver is 4 yards from the tackle, you're going to make a check if he's 5 yards from the tackle.
Gotcha.
If the running back is to the left of the quarterback and he switches to the right, that could result in us audibling what we're doing because that changes our coverage structure. Because now if he free releases to the right, it changes everything. So there was just a lot of that kind of stuff. And you'll still have that stuff in the Marcus Freeman defense. I mean, you have to make strength checks and all those types of things, emotions and whatever. But there was just so much involved in Coach Lee's defense, especially this past year. Now it's here. We have a foundation. We have a structure. But at some point in time, we have to let these guys just go play. And even though that's why I say it's a structured chaos in that there is very clear, here's your responsibility. But within that, there's also a notion of you've got to go find the ball. And here's a perfect example. I'm going to ask the people listening to the show this question, and we want to hear what you guys have to say. And by the way, this is great, right? By the way, that's
not wrong. He excellent. Is not wrong. I've taught in middle school. He is not wrong.
So here's an example. I'm going to ask you, Vince, this, and I'm going to ask other people this, because I had this conversation recently. Did you ever notice, especially the last couple of years, but even going back to Tranquil and Tavon Coney, that there were times where it would be like, why is the linebacker running right into this guy when the running back is running right past him? Right. And that happened a lot.
Because they're not tackling the ball. They're not paying attention. They're just covering space.
Exactly.
And that's not how you play good defense.
Right. And that's why I've said in the past, that's why it was so much more of a safety-driven defense, because the safeties had to make sure that exactly. Yeah. Whereas now there comes a point in time you're like, yes, we have to be gap sound, and
of course.
And when Marcus Freeman says that we're not going to be about football, we're going to be about football. He's not saying like the A and B gaps are both going to be unoccupied because we're that's not what he's saying. But what he's saying is there comes a point in time as a linebacker that you have to say, hey, yes, I'm hitting this B gap, but what's my number one responsibility? not to hit the B gap. My number one responsibility is to get to the football.
Yes, absolutely.
And there has to be some soundness. Now, that doesn't mean you can freelance and do all these other kind of things. It's about being focused on the football as opposed to being focused on what's my assignment. Does that make sense?
That makes
sense. You have to
me,
marry those two things together. And then also the other thing is it's going to come. But this is where the structure comes from. When you're bringing a corner fire one play and a safety blitz the next and a double inside, a Mike Will twist stunt with the nose, those are going to look like all these different things are thrown at them, but it's part of a core philosophy that they have of being aggressive, and they're always going to have someone inserted as the fourth person on the defensive line, if not a fifth person on the defensive line. It's just a lot with the different looks that they have. It's going to come from different people.
Sure.
And that's why I say there's a lot of method to the madness. If you study it, it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, from an offensive standpoint, it looks like a lot of million different things, and that's where it looks chaotic. And we're seeing that already from Marcus Freeman's defense. We saw it in the high practice videos, right? And we especially saw it in the game because then we could see everything from the all 22 standpoint in the press box, and then you could even see a lot more on the game film than maybe you can in other times too. So that's the biggest takeaway for me, Vince, from this spring is just overall. I love what I'm seeing from it. Now, it's a more aggressive philosophy, which means there are times they're going to give up big plays. They just are. They're going to give up a few more big plays, especially downfield pass plays in one-on-ones. But the trade-off is they're going to make a lot more plays. And so
you're going to see a lot more action in the backfield.
Exactly.
I think.
Exactly. Yeah. And also that is going to then result in more rushed passes, more hurried throws, more turnovers, those type of things. So that is another part of it. Here's number 2 of what we learned this spring, Vince, and that is so far, it seems like the defensive line is every bit as good as we thought it would be, if perhaps not better, because some backup players had really good performances this spring.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's funny because I had defensive depth is real, like written down. And of course, my eyes were going more towards the defensive line on that. But then I also had it in the questions. But it was more of a positive question, right? And so we can talk about it now if you want, but how good can this defensive line be? Like, what is the ceiling? Which is a great question to ask because I think that they're going to be really good. But what's the ceiling? Like, how good can they be? You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a legit question right now because there's a ton of talent there. We saw the depth in the blue gold game. We knew the talent that was there, I think. But to see it kind of play out in the game was exciting. I think this group as a whole can be elite.
Yeah.
Just how good can they be? And that's going to be a fun question to figure out the answer to.
And your question is sort of are they going to be just good? Or are they going to be great? No, they're going to be at least very good. Yeah. But can they truly be elite? That's the question. I brought my midweek musings back this week, Vince. So we're now reinstating the midweek musings.
That.
And the topic of today's article, so you can find it at right there, irishbreakdown.com. The topic was, who are 7 sophomores not named Tyree, Mayer, or Clarence Lewis that could have an impact this year? And I talked about Jordan Patelho and Riley Mills were 2 guys that I brought up. And now, of course, Foskey's a junior now, so he's old hat. It's time to pass him aside and focus on the younger players, which is happening with some fans, which I always kind of get a kick out of.
I know, right?
But but Foskey had a great spring. He's going to be the Viper. Then you have Jordan Patelho, who also had a great spring.
I thought
he has a really great blue gold game.
Yeah.
And now you look and say, okay, now you've got 2 guys at Viper that you're really excited about. One of them played a lot of middle linebacker in high school, can play off ball.
So you can,
you can use them together. Foskey is a big guy. He's 250 plus. There are times where maybe you could use them as outside guys. You can use them stacked right behind each other in certain looks. You can then use them to rotate, because imagine being a left tackle when you're in the fourth quarter and your team's got to make a game-winning drive and you're on snap 65, 66, 67, 70, and so forth, and Foskey's on snap 30 and Jordan Patelho's on snap 30. Or 35 and 25. And that's how you put games away late. Correct. And we saw how that benefited Notre Dame in 2018.
Right. That's where the depth comes in.
How many times did either Alquara, Hayes, Kareem, somebody made this big, huge play in the fourth quarter.
Sure.
Remember how just Michigan's linemen just could not block Notre Dame's ends at the end of that game. Pitt's linemen couldn't block Notre Dame's ends. Why? Because they had this deep two-man rotation. So, Khalid was on snap 45 and their left tackle was on snap 70.
Right.
And so that's why the defensive line could put those games away. We saw it a little bit this year against Clemson late in the game when Clemson had a lot of problems down the stretch blocking Notre Dame's ends because they were fresher.
And they're the ones that made the plays in overtime. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're in a similar situation this year. And it's not just that Viper end. Riley Mills had a great spring. And Jason Adamiola had a great spring. That's another situation where you're going to have a great rotation there. They're both a little undersized. They're both sub 290. So now you don't have to play them 50-plus snaps each. You can rotate them, keep them fresh for the same reasons. And because they are guys who can both play on the edge, there are circumstances where you could play both of them on the edge. You could go Mills on one end and Adamiola on the other end in a 3-3 look, and you could maybe even drop, Foskey or Pazelho, and then you've got your nose. And so there's just it gives you so many different options. You've got Myron Tungavaloa, who had a great spring. Well, you know what? So did Justin Adamiola, which means now there's times where you can move Myron Tungavaloa inside in pass rushing situations and put Justin Adamiola.
You can do it. Yeah.
You now have, honestly, and here's the thing. We didn't see Jacob Lacey this spring. We didn't see Gabriel Rubio for half the spring. Howard Cross had a big spring, but you're going to get some guys like Rubio and Lacey. They're going to get thrown into this conversation. We saw Nana Osafa-Mensah flashing. Yeah. The depth of this defensive line, Vince, and this was one of your takeaways from the entire spring, was the depth of this defense, especially in the front seven, is as good as I've ever seen it at Notre Dame in my adult life. I can't comment on what it was like in 88 or 93. I was 10 and 15 when Notre Dame had those teams. I could enjoy them as a fan,
sure,
but not as a person who does analysis.
The depth of each position. Yeah,
this is by far and I'm not just talking about numbers. I'm talking about dudes that, like, Notre Dame's third string strong side end was a top 250 recruit coming out of high school in Nana Osafa-Mensah. Jacob Lacey, who was a borderline top 100 recruit, is going to be battling to get into the 2 deep next year. Think about that.
Yeah.
Gabriel Rubio 4 years ago in 2017 plays 40 snaps a game as a true freshman. Now, as a true freshman, as a top 100 recruit, he should be battling for any playing time.
Yeah.
The depth that this team has up front, Vince, is amazing, which means, number one, it's less pressure on one guy to always be great. The question to your question is okay, now can this group go out and take games over in the fall? That still remains a question because they were going against an offensive line that's got some struggles. It's behind the 8 ball. How good are they going to be? But at the very least, I think this is a very good group. And I said before the spring that this defensive line has a chance to be Notre Dame's best of the Brian Kelly era, which is saying something.
It's absolutely saying something.
And I'm excited because I feel more justified in saying that it could be that way than I did even before the spring.
Sure.
Now it's show me time. Now they got to go out and do it. But they're also in a position, Vince, where they are better able to sustain an injury than they've ever been.
Good point.
And that's the other part. So let's just say hypothetically one of the D tackles goes down. Okay, well, now you're in a situation where what? You move Howard Cross over there, you bump up Gabriel Rubio. You're going to be fine.
Sure.
And the fact that we didn't even think about, oh, yeah, you know what? Jacob Lacey didn't practice this spring. And it's like an afterthought. 4 years ago, that would have been devastating to the depth chart. Like they were playing walk-ons at nose tackle. So I think that is something. And look, I don't think this is ever going to change in football. It hasn't in my lifetime. If you want to be a championship team, you better be good up front on defense. And I think Notre Dame has a chance to be outstanding on defense.
Well, and I think that was what was holding Notre Dame back during some other seasons and I'm referring to like the defensive line in particular. I think there was a point where the common attitude was that Notre Dame can't recruit good defensive linemen. And I think that's obviously gone by the wayside based on the last few years, from what this defensive line has been able to do. They've had some sparks, they had one guy or 1.5 guys, that are really good.
Or a really good starting lineup with no 2012,
depth.
You had Cap, you had Lewis Nix, you had Stephon Tuitt, and then you had one good backup in Sheldon Day, who's a highly ranked guy, but he was a true freshman. And then after that was Tony Springman. It was the late Kona Schwenke. There was a drop-off between the starting lineup. I look at 2015 as another example, Vince. You had Rochelle, you had Jerry Tillery, you had Sheldon Day, and you had Romeo Guara, 4 NFL players. But then what was behind it?
Right.
There was a big drop-off. That's, to your point, is they've never had a line that across the board has this kind of depth. And even in 2018, Vince, when they had that great end depth, they didn't have the same depth inside. Adam Miola was a freshman. Tung Valoa got hurt in the first game of the year.
Right.
You had Kurt Heinz was just a sophomore. You didn't have that same depth. Yeah. Now it's just like, it's just you're 3 deep at least 3 spots. When Jacob Lacey comes back, Vince, Notre Dame is a legit 3 deep at 3 of the 4 defensive line positions.
That's crazy. That's crazy depth. That's
because your third
there are plenty of teams out there that would take your third string.
Think about this. Your third string defensive line for Notre Dame going into fall camp is going to be Nana Osafa-Mensah at strong side end, Jacob Lacey at nose tackle, Gabriel Rubio at 3 technique. And then you say, okay, well, right now you're not sure who that third guy is going to be at Viper. Okay. But think about that. Jacob Lacey, Gabriel Rubio, Nana Osafa-Mensah is your third string defensive line heading into fall camp. There's a lot of teams, and this is why people say, why are you so optimistic about Notre Dame despite all the losses? Because there's at least over half the teams on the schedule that would say, I'd like for that to be my starting defensive line.
That's what I was getting at. Yes, absolutely. No question. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one.
So, third, number 3 key.
Okay.
The number 3 takeaway that we got is you had high expectations for Jack Kaiser coming into the spring. I think even with your high expectations, Jack Kaiser was even better than we thought he was going to be. Let me say this. He looked more comfortable at Rover immediately than I thought. I thought it was going to take a little bit of time.
Sure.
It looked extremely natural for him. From day one, from the first practice that we saw, it looked that way to me.
I've always been a Jack Kaiser fan, ever since we saw let me take that back. I think you and I believed what he could do. Then we got a chance to see it in a game last year, and then we really didn't get to see him really the rest of the year outside of special teams and some cameo appearances, things of that nature. But I've been a fan of his for a long time, and I was just waiting for him to get his opportunity. And again, we talked about how Marcus Freeman coming in was perfect timing for a guy like Houston Griffith, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty good timing for Jack Kaiser too. And of course there was, an injury that could have helped him. I get that. But at the same time, he got his opportunity at Rover. And I didn't know going into the spring, I wasn't exactly sure where Jack Kaiser was going to get his opportunity. Was it going to be at Will? Was it going to be at Rover? But wherever they were going to put him, I was confident that he was going to make plays, but he has settled in at Rover so incredibly well, better than I thought. And I will be the first one to admit it, better than I thought. I thought he was going to be successful, but you mentioned it, the ease at which he has taken to that position really surprised me in a great way. I'm so happy for him and his opportunity. And of course, he still needs to grow and he still needs to, take those steps and get better and better. No question about it. But what I saw in the blue gold game, I was very impressed with what Jack Kaiser brought to the table. It's going to be very, very difficult to move him off of that spot.
Yeah.
It was really, really good.
I think the surprising thing for me was just how productive he was throughout the spring in the pass game.
Sure.
I thought that would be the thing that would take the most time. Like when we saw him in the blue gold game, dropping into coverage and seeing a swing route or a slide route or something like that, a crosser, and he'd jump it and break it up. Those are things I expected of him. It was, what is that, Vince? What you got there? Nice product placement. It was those things where, that's what you expected of him. When you saw him taking on perimeter runs, like we expected those things. What I was surprised by was how good he was in man coverage and making plays down the field. We saw him make multiple interceptions in practice. We saw him even on a couple times when they completed passes on him. It was like Michael Mayer with like outstretched arms on a perfectly placed pass where, it's like you had to make it that way or he was going to break it up. I think that's the thing for me is his coverage down, like we had to flip his hips and run. Yeah. And that's where his high school experience helped him out.
Bingo.
Because he was
out of my mouth. killing me.
Explain what we mean by that.
Well,
I
don't know if this is the direction that you were going to go, but what I was going to say is, he played quarterback, obviously, in high school because he went to a very, very small high school.
Mm-hmm.
It is clear to me that he understands offenses, right? I mean, and he's able.
Not where I was going to go with that. So this is going to be good. No, this is good.
Okay. I think he understands offenses very, very well because he was quarterback, and he is able to, dissect things maybe a little bit faster. Now, it's one thing to say you can dissect things, but it's another thing to be able to execute that, right? And that's where his athletic ability takes over.
Yeah.
But I think his mental ability to dissect what's happening on the offensive side really benefits him in that spot at Rover.
Yeah. I was actually going to go with the fact of what he did on defense in high school. Remember, he was a free safety, and he did everything. He covered, he played the center of the field. Now, he's not a free safety in college. He was a free safety at 1A football in Indiana, right?
Which
he was
is
the best
really
athlete
small.
anyone had.
Yeah.
But what I mean is that experience, he had to come up. At times he played in the slot. At times he had to cover. Like, he literally had to cover people in high school. And he had to play with great range in high school when he was playing the middle of the field. Sure. And he was a tremendous – I mean, he was the first – was it the first ever 1A Mr. Football? The first Mr. Football in Indiana was a 1A player.
I believe
which just
accurate,
shows how dominant he was, and on both sides of the ball, because he was a quarterback. I think he rushed for like over 1,600 yards as a senior, correct?
That's really good, yeah.
And that was with him playing like half a games. I mean, they were so dominant. Yes, he'd play like half a game. But I think that experience playing free safety, and he has to think and read. And here's what I mean. A free safety is for the defense the way that Jack was used, which a lot of times is right in the middle of the field. Mm-hmm. In high school is a lot like a quarterback, meaning you have to see everything. You have to know what the corner's doing, the slot's doing. And he was basically also the quarterback of the defense. And I think those things have helped Jack's transition to make it a really quick, smooth transition to where you watch him play and you're like, is he Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah? No. Is Notre Dame going to have any issues getting production and big time play out of the Rover position? No. And that's how I feel. And we haven't even seen Paul Moala come back yet, who I think is going to be able to provide good rotation reps. Yeah. And I think Jack's emergence too. Yes, Jack's emergence too. You just say that because they're from Indiana. I'm just kidding.
Just because Jack's emergence going to go to high school,
good for Isaiah Pryor. And what I mean by that is Isaiah Pryor is a really tough athletic player, but he's a limited. Let me say this: athletic in a straight line.
Sure.
I don't think Isaiah is as rangy as you
he's
like.
Not a flip your hips kind of guy.
He's not a cover guy.
Yeah.
But now, because of Jack's emergence as sort of your every down guy, when you put Isaiah in, you can use him now more as a
situationally.
Weapon.
Absolutely.
He's going to pressure. He's going to attack the run.
Well, you can see him getting time, against a Wisconsin or against Navy.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Yep. Like, I could see him getting more time in games like that. When they're playing against teams, they're going to go up tempo and spread the ball out. It's not an Isaiah Pryor game.
Yeah.
But like you said, just to echo what you said, having guys with different skill sets benefits you. It makes you deeper and it allows you to do different things. Now, I do think Jack Kaiser can play against any of those teams.
It's not about. It's about you still like to have an opportunity to where can you take 10 snaps a game off Jack Kaiser's plate? It's going to make him better,
and where it's not a situation where you're going to get killed.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, right.
No, 100% agree. Yeah. And I think that's a positive. But my point is Jack's emergence makes Paul Moala better. It makes Isaiah Pryor better. It's not just about Jack. I think also when you look at a guy like Marcus Freeman, when you coach at Cincinnati, and I don't mean this as a disrespect to Cincinnati, but when you coach at Cincinnati, the reality is you have to learn to coach with more limited players than you're going to have at Notre Dame. Meaning more one-dimensional. Hey, look, this kid's really good at this, but the reason he's at Cincinnati is because he's only good at this.
Correct.
And so I think Coach Freeman's going to come with that experience of
finding.
I know what to do with one-trick ponies.
Sure.
But you can't have one-trick ponies in your starting lineup. The fact that Jack emerged at Rover means you've got Isaiah, who in a very crass way of saying it is a bit of a one-trick pony. But now you can utilize that one trick effectively because you have another guy that stepped up as the main starter. So I think that's a very important thing for me. Number 4, our number 4 takeaway is both a something we're excited about, but also is going to somewhat segue into these next couple points are going to also segue into where there's still concerns about the defense.
Sure.
The cornerback position is still a question mark heading into the offseason.
No doubt.
Having said that, I feel a lot better about the cornerback position today than I did heading into the spring. And
No
there's
doubt.
4 reasons for it, really. Number one, I think the depth, to your point, is good. We saw guys like Ramon Henderson have good springs. Caleb Offord, I thought, played really well in the spring game, which is something I never thought I would say about Caleb Offord. So I was very pleased by that. The depth was good. Clarence Lewis so far has made good freshman to sophomore growth, right? And he was already a solid player as a freshman.
Sure.
He so far has made good freshman to solid growth. I didn't see any step backs from Clarence this spring. That's important because, again, the term sophomore slump is in existence for a reason.
Right.
And because you can tend to get exposed as you play more, teams can see your weakness as well. That's why it's important for a guy like Clarence to grow in some areas where, as a freshman, if he would have played more, if Clarence would have been a day one starter, he'd have got picked on a lot more late in the year because teams would have found his weaknesses.
Sure.
They didn't have time to do that last year. Now teams will, but he's now growing in those areas, which is important. So now you can't just pick on him because you saw this late in the year. Well, let's try this on him because he's better than that now. Number 3 is the emergence of Tariq Bracy.
I thought re-emergence. How about re-emergence?
Re-emergence.
Yeah.
We saw Tariq was made a lot of plays in the highlight videos. Marcus Freeman praised Tariq's consistency, and he looked confident in the blue gold game. He got beat once, but he made a lot of plays. But he was consistent. And the biggest thing is, Vince, he played confidently, and that's so important. Now he's got to go carry that in the fall. And then the fourth reason is one that I know you're going to love and agree with, but Cam Hart looked far more comfortable with everything about being a corner. His flipping his hips, finding receivers in routes. He didn't play that first ball real well, but he played the route well. That was the thing I like to see. And after that, he was all over the Notre Dame receivers. There's still a lot of question marks, Vince, but man, I thought this group was way ahead of where they were when we started the spring. The expectations when we started the spring.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I mean, it was definitely a position that I was paying attention to as I was watching the game and as we were going through spring and things of that nature. And we were hearing good things, but you kind of have to see it to really feel
when have
more
coaches ever gone behind the scenes like, hey, we suck. We're terrible there. They're always going to feed, hey, it's good. It's not. I mean, not from Notre Dame coaches. Not when you're talking to your Notre Dame sources. They're like,
joking.
hey, we're terrible.
I'm joking, but
every coach has said that about their team 2 weeks into fall camp. I've said this before. You go into fall camp, man, you're so excited, like we're going to be good. And then the first 3 days without pads on, man, we're so sharp. And then by the second week of fall camp, you're like, oh my God, we're not going to win a game.
We're terrible.
I think every coach says that 2 weeks into fall camp. But what I'm saying is, when you talk to sources at Notre Dame, you never hear like, we suck, we're terrible. There's always, this kid's come along, this kid's looking great. So you have to take some of it with a grain of salt. But then the other part of it is, okay, but then we saw it in highlights, and more importantly, Vince, we saw it in the game. Even when they were getting beat, they were getting beat because A, the scheme was great, or B, because the other guy on the other side of the ball made a great play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going in, I figured Clarence would be okay. I was fairly confident his needle would be moving in the right direction. I think we all had questions about Tariq Bracy and his confidence, but again, he was able to hit the reset button with the hiring of Marcus Freeman. For better or worse, he was able to hit that reset button, which is great for him, and he took advantage. At least up to this point, he's taken advantage of that, and that's great. And Cam Hart, I think we both like Cam Hart. Obviously I project my love a little bit more publicly, but he's such a physical specimen for what I want in a corner, right? I mean, he's tall, he's rangy, he's athletic. He just needed to learn how to play corner. And I think, all fall he had that opportunity. And then all spring he had that opportunity, and he's taken advantage of that opportunity. And so, I was asking myself, is he going to be able to do that? Going into the fall, are we going to see strides from him that we were hoping to see in the spring? And I think we did. And so it solidifies the depth a little bit. You've got 3 guys, I think, at this point that you feel very comfortable with. And that's a really, really good thing. And then you saw some flashes of some younger guys too, as you had mentioned. And so
And we didn't see much of the freshmen in the highlight videos, but I liked what I saw from Philip Riley and especially Ryan Barnes in the Blue Gold game.
I did too. They didn't look like freshmen.
Yeah, Ryan Barnes is whipping Joe Wilkins on a relatively consistent basis in the Blue Gold game.
I was very happy, and so I am. This is overused, but I guess I'm cautiously optimistic about what the cornerback position can be, and I'm excited to see how they grow from now until we see them in September.
Because we saw so many good things from so many players, Vince, it gives me a greater sense of confidence. You're going to get at least 3 or 4 guys that are going to play well in the fall. And that's the big key is if it's just, hey, we only have 3 corners and one of them doesn't play well, you're in trouble. Or somebody gets hurt, you're in trouble. The fact that we saw growth across the board and we saw the freshmen, Philip Riley had his issues early in spring, which you expected. But then I thought he battled as you got deeper into the spring. I think Ryan Barnes looked really comfortable playing in the Blue Gold game, despite the fact he missed a third of spring practice with an illness. So there's just there's so many talented bodies now. Ramon Henderson performing well. Caleb Offord looked like he belonged out there. You feel better about the fact that, hey, you know what? You're going to have enough guys that are going to step up and fill this depth chart, and you're going to be at least good there. Maybe you're not going to be great there. That's still a long way away before I'm ready to say, oh, they're going to be great.
Sure.
You're not there yet. We're seeing positive strides. That's the thing that we're saying. I don't have the same confidence about the corners that I have about the defensive line at this point in time.
No,
but it's more about
different confidence
what
level.
The expectations were of that group heading into the spring, and when you consider how much that group struggled at times last season. I feel very, very good about the trajectory of that position.
Sure.
And we haven't even seen JoJo Johnson and Chance Tucker yet. They don't arrive till the fall. So
good point.
You have to feel good about it. And also, it kind of transitions into our next part, which is obviously Kyle Hamilton is going to be what Kyle Hamilton's going to be. If he's only as good as he was last year, he's an All-American. I liked what I saw from Houston Griffith all spring. I feel good about where he is. I thought KJ Wallace did some nice things. Justin Walters did some nice things, but I'm still more concerned about the safety depth than I am about anything else. And look, Kerry G is going to show up in the fall, but I have a lot of questions about that position right now. That's probably my biggest question mark. And we'll talk about linebacker in a second here. We'll wrap up with linebacker, but safety to me, Vince, is the biggest question mark. Having said that, you've got a lot of big-bodied corners. And if you're a coaching staff and you're saying, the 3 guys that we talked about early, Bracey, Lewis, and Cam Hart, they're all, hey, look, we that's our foundation right now.
Sure.
Between Caleb Offord, Ramon Henderson, Philip Riley, Ryan Barnes, Chance Tucker, and JoJo Johnson. That's 7 guys, I think, right? Am I doing the math there? You've got the 4 freshmen. You've got Ramon Henderson. You got Caleb Offord. So that's 6, and there's somebody else that I'm missing. But you got at least 6 guys there that you can say, you know what? We can't play 9 guys a corner.
Right.
So somebody can come help us over here.
Sure.
And I think that's the other reason why the fact that we saw so many players a corner do good things. And I think it speaks when an entire depth chart improves.
Right.
You point to the guy that coaches that depth chart and say, that guy knows what he's doing and he's doing a great job. And that's what Mike Mickens has done.
No doubt.
Now you can say, because of that depth, you can then look at and say, okay, you know what? We've already got a corner committed in 2022. We're in a good place with Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison and some Jaden Bellamy and some other corners. We can take so-and-so and move him to safety now and feel good about
whatever phraseology you want to use.
Whether it's nickel, whether it's that nickel spot, whether it's in the back end, whatever.
Right.
And so that gives me a little bit of comfort that there's at least going to be an opportunity there, but that's still right now my biggest – when I say question, a question from a concerning point of view. Because if something happens, and God forbid, like last year when Kyle Hamilton got ejected from the North Carolina game, they threw in Houston Griffith, and he did great.
Yeah.
And people forget that Houston was playing a lot when that second half when Notre Dame completely shut down North Carolina. Houston was a key part of that. I mean, DJ Brown did some decent things in that situation too, but you lose now, you lose Houston or Kyle, and you look at and say, well, who's coming in next?
Sure.
And KJ Wallace did some nice things, but, is he ready to be that guy yet? We have to see. Justin Walters did some nice things, but is he ready to be that guy yet? We'll see. And the reality is DJ Brown is a smart, heady, tough football player. But as we saw in the Blue Gold game, it confirmed exactly what we saw last fall, that athletically he is limited in an every down role. He just is. He is better as a rotation. So again,
Sure.
if you're using DJ as part of a 3-4 man rotation, he's good. If DJ has to step into the starting lineup because somebody got hurt, there's some teams on the schedule that I'm nervous about playing. If that's
right now he may be that guy like that. I think he might be that third safety
at the end of spring. At the end of spring, I'd say
right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like right now, he's that guy, and I think that is a little bit concerning. I will say that I'm excited about the duo of Houston Griffith and Kyle Hamilton and what that can be. But you need more than two. I mean, you just do. And whether that's a schematic thing where you're going to have some guys rotating and things of that nature, or whether you're talking about an injury, you need more than two. And so that worries me a little bit. But I like your thinking on, potentially bringing a corner over, or if you're going to go with that quote unquote 3 safety look, you have a corner as that third safety.
But that's also, Vince, why Jack Kaiser's emergence was so important.
Good point, because you can keep him in the game as well.
I feel a lot more. See, that's the benefit that Jeremiah Wusu-Mower brought to you. Mm-hmm. You could play nickel, and he'd be your nickel. That's how good he was in coverage.
Sure.
I think Pro Football Focus, who their rankings are pretty terrible, but I do like their
breakdowns.
Yes. And they graded him out as the best slot cover player in the country last year amongst all positions.
Yeah.
Corner, safeties, linebackers, everybody. And he brought you a bit of that unicorn ability to where you could stay in your base defense and play like you were a nickel. That is such a rare thing. As good as Drew Tranquil was in 2017, he was a linebacker playing rover.
Sure.
Jeremiah Wusu was a linebacker against the run and a safety against the pass. A nickel guy against the pass.
Perfect hybrid, yeah.
Right. And to me, I think Jack brings that. I'm not saying he's Jeremiah Wusu-Mower. I'm just simply talking about his skill set. He can cover tight ends and backs, obviously. But I believe especially if you have a safety over top protecting him, I like his ability to play in coverage, to flip his hips and play, which also helps protect you if you don't feel good about your depth from a safety standpoint.
Well, and I love the fact that in practice, he's going to have to cover Kyron Williams, Chris Tyree, and Michael Mayer.
And Avery Davis.
And Lawrence Keys. Yeah. It's only going to make him better seeing those guys day in and day out. Because
and that's true of the entire secondary. I mean, it really is. It's true of the entire secondary. And that's where, look, when I've coached in the past, I mean, my last coaching job before I got into Defiance, I was at Christopher Newport, and our DB coach was Justin Lustig, who's now Clark Lee's special teams coordinator at Vanderbilt. And we would talk. I mean, we'd get on the board all the time. I mean, he was the DB coach, I was the receivers coach, and we would get on the board and we would challenge each other and talk each other. But then that made us better as coaches. But it wasn't nearly as valuable as his defensive secondary, which was excellent, going against my receivers, which was excellent. Right. And our guys would both say, Saturdays were the easy part.
Right.
Because it's like, if we could cover Nathan Davis and Curfew Spate and George Jones Monday to Thursday, then we knew we were going to cover the teams that we were going to play on Saturday. And then my guys were, if I can beat Rob Rodriguez in practice, well, I know I'm going to be able to beat whoever I play against on Saturday. And that's what USC used to praise. That's what Clemson can do. That's what Alabama can do. That's what Ohio State can do.
Iron sharpens iron, right?
Yes, and we're seeing that. And I think that is going to be even more beneficial to the young secondary, even more so than it's going to be to the receivers.
Yeah.
I think it's going to help those guys. So if Cam Hart can cover Kevin Austin, and if he can cover Braden Lindsey, and if he can cover Xavier Watts and those kind of guys, then he's going to be good. If Tariq Bracy can run with Lawrence Keys and Avery Davis and Braden Lindsey, and same thing with Clarence Lewis, then they're going to be good on Saturdays.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's where I feel good about. It's kind of like this. It's the opposite of what we said about the D-line. Yes, the D-line is great, but are they really that good, or is the offensive line struggling?
Yeah.
If the secondary's playing well in fall camp, there's not going to be any doubt about are they ready to play, because you're more confident in the competition they're facing. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And so that's why I feel like if it is a weakness, it's going to get exposed in fall camp, which means the coaches can then address it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, Vince, you know this. You don't know something's a weakness until you get to play another team.
And you're like, oh.
So we weren't that good. Our receivers are just terrible.
Yeah.
But with the case of Notre Dame, you know what these. I mean, you know what Braden Lindsey can do. You've seen him do it. You've seen what Lawrence Keys can do. We know that Kevin Austin is talented. We know what Avery Davis can do. You know that you have arguably the best tight end in the country coming back.
Right.
You know you have one of the best running backs in the country coming back. They've proven it on Saturdays.
Correct.
And so if your guys can handle themselves and handle their business against those guys, and that's what I thought we saw in the Blue Gold game.
Sure.
I thought for the most part,
Totally agree.
again, they got beat sometimes. That's encouraging. If the receivers were getting locked down the whole game, I'd be like, maybe they're not as good as we thought they were. So I think that's the exciting thing. And then the final question mark, Vince, is kind of a positive, but we saw strides from the linebackers across the board. I thought Shane Simon was better. I thought Maris was better. I thought Bo was better, but there's not there yet. There's still work to be done.
Sure.
And then your question was more about, okay, who's going to
be where, and who's going to be playing with who, and what's that rotation going to look like? Because I think, we didn't see a lot of Drew White, obviously, because of injury, and we didn't see him at all in the Blue Gold game. I thought Bo Bauer has taken a step in the right direction. I thought Shane Simon's taken a step in the right direction. I thought Marist, if he can stay under control, has taken a step in the right direction. It's just
especially if Shane Simon can be consistent, because if Shane can take hold of that will job, now we can have the same conversation with Marist that we had about Isaiah Pryor. Now I think Marist is a better player than Isaiah Pryor, but he's still on the younger
same
side.
Idea, though.
So now it's like when he's in the game, we're using him to do this. We're using him to attack.
Yep.
And you can't, if he has to be the every down guy, then you have to somewhat tamp down some of that aggressiveness. Where if he's rotating with Shane, it's
when he's in,
turn him loose, baby. And I'm really excited to see Drew White in this defense, because I think Drew is an we've talked about this. I think he's a very underrated athlete.
Absolutely.
And he was a very productive player. And he's going to have to battle to keep hold of his job against Bo Bauer, and that's what you want from big time teams. But if he holds on to that job and if he can stay healthy, he's a guy that could end up having a 10+ tackle for loss year, simply because he was doing it in the last couple years in a defense that wasn't necessarily designed for the Mike linebacker to rack up a ton of tackles for loss.
Right. And I think all the linebackers are going to benefit from the defensive line as well.
Right. Exactly.
I just think that their production is going to go up because offensive linemen aren't going to be able to get to that next level, and they're going to be able to roam around a little bit more free.
Right.
And in this defense specifically, where there is emphasis on getting to the ball carrier and getting to the ball period, I really think the production of this linebacking core is going to go well. Of course, it can only go up from the one, but I think overall, I think production from the linebacking core is only going to go up.
My big question mark with this unit is still, and I'm talking the inside linebackers now, not the rover. It's still pass game. It's still coverage. That's still a concern for me. We saw some good moments. Shane Simon had a great play where he undercut Kyron Williams. Bo Bauer still a bit of a liability in the pass game. We didn't get to see Drew White handle it. Maris can be a little bit undisciplined at times. I still want to see that consistent ability to see a seam route and cover it, to see that swing route and get out in front of it. Those are the things that I still want to see. We saw some plays being made against the pass, but that is still probably with this unit my biggest question mark from a concern standpoint is still their ability in coverage, because
I'm very comfortable against the run, but I agree with you that is a place of concern, but a place that can be the concern can go away fairly quickly once we see them in action against some other teams, I guess is the best way to put it for me.
Yep. All right, Vince.
Yes.
That is it.
Let's look at some questions. Podcast. What do you think?
So let's dive into some questions.
First of all, I'm really excited about this defense. Can I just throw that out there?
Big picture takeaway, Vince. It was as good, if not better, than I had expected. And we talked about how we thought this unit was going to be very good going into the spring.
Yes.
And so we set a very high. So it's kind of funny. We have completely opposite takeaways. We set a low bar for the offense. The offense still has a lot of holes, but we're encouraged by it because they weren't terrible. Was the fear. They showed a lot of progress, and that's whereas the defense, we set a super high bar, and at the very least, they met it.
Yes, I agree.
And in some ways, I think they're even ahead of where I thought they'd be.
I think they surpassed it a little bit for me, just because
corner.
Corner specifically. We were both justifiably concerned about what that depth was going to look like. There's just a lot of guys with not a lot of experience, and a guy who had an attack of confidence and a lack of confidence, and
we
never
didn't
know
what
that was. Believe me, I get it. And so I've been dealing with that in my own house with my own kid. So I get it. It's tough. And so they met my they far exceeded my expectations at corner, which allowed the whole defense to at least meet, if not exceed. So that just makes me even more excited for what this defense can bring to the table. So I'm pumped. I'm pumped for the season, frankly. This is going to be a long summer to try to get there. But all right, let's jump into some of these questions. Right there.
First of all, Notre Dame 2164. Thanks for joining us. Got a couple people that are saying hi. Omer Austin, happy Hump Day, Irish fans. Absolutely.
Okay.
So and then real quick, I would say this real quick to our man Connor, who is a regular and your favorite guy. Vince has picked his favorite child, and it is Connor, who currently lives in Vermont, which is an absolutely beautiful part of the country. But if you're looking to leave Vermont, Indiana is a good place for it. And especially up in this area. Vince and I obviously live in the same neighborhood. I have lived in Denver, Colorado. I've lived in Virginia Beach area. I've lived in I've lived in North Carolina, Florida. I've lived in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, and north of Philly.
Man,
and it's what happens when you coach college football, man.
You're right.
You move around a lot.
Honestly, it's why I didn't go that route. But I get it.
I do enjoy very much living in northern Indiana. I do very much so.
I will say, and this is getting off on a tangent just a skosh bit, but I saw you guys talking about where you live and thinking about, but the cost of living around here is very, very doable. I love the neighborhood that we live in and the neighbors that we have and all of that. And I love the change of the seasons. That's me. But the fact that I'm a teacher, I've got some other gigs on the side, obviously.
Yeah.
But the fact that I'm a teacher, I can live where we live. My kids can go to really good schools, and
Vince, you could not live in a neighborhood like we live in if you taught in Virginia Beach.
Correct.
For Virginia, where I'm from.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm saying. We're very comfortable because of where we live, and I could not be happier about that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out,
especially in northern Indiana, because you're a couple hours from Chicago.
Yes,
there's tons of beautiful places right across the border in Michigan to go see. And and the best part about that is, Vince, we can go visit the beautiful parts of Michigan, but not actually have to live in Michigan.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Indy's 2.5 away. There's a lot of places you can. I mean, we can get in a car and drive a couple hours and be at Cedar Point. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of
Cedar Point this way. You got
Chicago,
Great America
that way.
This way. You've got Detroit. You've got Indy.
Yeah,
it's a perfect place.
It really is.
To me.
So if you're looking for a place to relocate, and there's a lot of job opportunities in Indiana, there's a lot of job opportunities everywhere right now. Yeah. But yeah. So and of course the best part about it is Notre Dame.
I thought you said you could live in our neighborhood or something, but
we don't want to turn them away from moving here. John A1, my man, thank you so much for the super chat. So Vince, you missed this. So since you weren't on the show on my birthday because you had to mow your lawn, we were talking about games, and John did not remember the 2006 Notre Dame Penn State game. The one where Notre Dame shredded Penn State. Remember the game where Brady hits Carlson up the seam and he smokes Paul Posluszny and all that?
Oh, man.
While I was watching Notre Dame Miami 88 last night, my man John A1 was watching Notre Dame Penn State.
Okay, fair enough.
So he did enjoy that. So his question, Vince, is, and this is a good one, which defensive player made the biggest jump this spring and who was the biggest surprise?
Okay. Biggest jump for me was Jack Kaiser, and in a great way. I don't want to rehash everything that I said before, but I am super excited about what he's going to bring to the table. I thought he was a good player to begin with. He got an opportunity and he seized it. So I think he made the biggest jump.
I actually, for me, it's Jordan Patojo. I thought he made a huge jump this spring. He was a guy that I thought went from just sort of a bull in a china shop this year. I mean, it wasn't just that he was exploding off the edge and showing great motor and all. Last year he was a great motor guy, but he didn't know what he was doing. Now he's like dipping his shoulder to get around the edge. He's getting low. I saw a thing. I'm trying to remember. I saw a tweet the other day where it was a quote that great defensive lineman had said, offensive linemen don't like playing below their belly buttons, right? And it was a clip of Von Miller coming around the edge and just dipping. And you see the great defensive ends and the great pass rushers have that ability to contort their body to get an angle and get around the edge.
They call it getting skinny.
Yes.
Getting skinny.
Or to get low.
Yeah.
And we saw that from Jordan this spring. So he was actually showing nuance. It wasn't just speed and motor. There was some nuance. We're seeing Isaiah Foskey use his hands more. So we're seeing that from all over. But But I thought Jordan made a huge jump. And it sounds like that he's done a lot of growing up off the field too, which I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. Vince, what was your biggest surprise?
My biggest surprise was Shane Simon. I hate to say it, but the way he played and I knew that he had the ability to play the way he's been playing this spring. And we saw it in practice, but we hadn't seen it in a game outside of the one Clemson game. And I was very nervous about what he was going to bring to the table in the spring. And so he surprised me in a good way. And I hope that he can continue on that path, right? I mean, he could be a huge part of this defense at the linebacker position at the will spot. And like you said, if he can solidify that starting role, then that allows Marist to be that kind of sub where he can just come in and do his thing. I think that makes this defense better. And so he has been my positive surprise so far this year.
There are some guys that I thought surprised me in the game. I thought Litchfield Ajavon had a nice game. I thought that KJ Wallace had a nice game. I thought that Caleb Offord had a nice game. But if we're looking at the entirety of the spring, I can't disagree with your choice there. I think that's a really good pick. And it's a surprise, not from that we didn't know he could do it. It's about whether or not he would do it, and that's what it is. John A1 also has a question: has Notre Dame found its third safety or fifth DB to run in Coach Freeman's defense? And we kind of addressed that a little bit, John. Right. No, they haven't. But it doesn't have to be a third safety. It can be a corner, or it can be, in this situation, a Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, a Jack Kaiser type of linebacker. And that's also what they're recruiting Nolan Ziegler to play, who's a 6'4", 205-pound linebacker prospect, but he actually plays safety in high school. He plays slot, he covers, and those kind of things. So they are preparing to be able to play multiple types of athletes in that position to where it doesn't have to be. But I do think that the emergence of, and we didn't really discuss this, the emergence of Tariq Bracy and Cam Hart gives Notre Dame the opportunity to be better prepared to put a pure cover guy in that position when the need is there. Sure. There may be some games like USC, for example. Would I be shocked if Notre Dame went with a 3-3-5 against USC, where they, instead of leaving Jack Kaiser in space, they put him in the box and have a true three linebacker thing in the box, to where then he can kind of cover tight ends and backs, and now you have a true fifth DB out there? I wouldn't be shocked by that at all. But who's that going to be? I think now it's going to have
cornerback position.
Right now, absolutely, it's going to have to. And now the only safety could potentially be KJ Wallace. I think KJ could maybe have a role there, but right now with Clarence Lewis and Tariq Bracy and Cam Hart all having good springs, I feel a lot more confident of seeing that trio on the field together as opposed to any sort of combination of three safeties.
I agree,
and that's why their emergence is so important.
You kind of touched on this, so I'm kind of skipping around here a little bit. But Sean had a question about. How multiple will we be this year? How much will we see 4-3, 3-4, 4-2, 3-3, 4-1, 3-2? Will we see more exotic things like the radar defense, 5-2? I think the sky's the limit, to be honest with you. I don't yes. The answer is yes. I think you will see some form of what you think all of these things are at some point or another. Yeah. And he kind of follows it up, and we can kind of discuss all of it. How much will personnel decisions be game dependent? Will we see different starters and different rotations in most weeks? I don't think you're going to see different starters. You might one or two here or there, but I think
if there's a week where they're going to be more like if when they play USC, could I see it? Do I think we might see a different lineup? Yes. When they play Navy, could we see a different lineup?
Sure.
Yes.
We've seen that in the past.
Yes. I think for the most part we're going to see the same players. I think how those players are going to be utilized, Sean, is going to change from week to week. There may be some weeks where we may see the personnel packages used more, and so it's like we've seen that on third down, but in this game maybe they're doing it as their base defense, and I think that's one of the advantages of what Marcus Freeman does is that versatility, that multiplicity is a part of this, and this goes back to the original thing that we talked about, Sean, which is. That's Marcus Freeman's DNA now. That's who he is now. He evolved from that, that guy at Ohio State, that when he was a player, that this is, we're better than everybody we play. So we're going to line up and we're going to be better than everybody. Right. And there's a sound, there's a toughness where then he goes to Cincinnati and it's like, well, we just can't line up and be better than everybody that we play now.
Right.
And so, we have to be able to do these different things. Well, now you're at Notre Dame. where you can kind of have the best of both worlds.
And you've got guys with positional flexibility.
You're going to have dudes everywhere. So most weeks you're going to have the best talent on the field most weeks, but you also have really smart kids that you can be very multiple and diverse with. And that's so needed in today's game, where one week you're playing with Stanford's pro style offense. The next week you're playing USC's air raid offense. That's all pass. I mean, USC averaged less than 100 yards rushing per game last year.
Crazy.
That's unheard of at a school with the tailback tradition that USC had. Yep. And then the next week, literally the next week, you're playing a North Carolina air raid that just put 2,000-yard running backs out there.
Into the NFL, too.
You have to be able to match up personnel-wise in this. And so it's so important to be able to do that. And I think to his question, there may be some games where we see more of a 3-4 personnel out of 4-2-5 alignments or 4-3 alignments or 3-3-5 alignments. Other weeks we're going to see more 4-3 personnel.
That's going to be part of the fun,
3-3-5. Yes. And here's the key. Here's the key. And this goes back to one of my original comments. That is why it's so important to have that structured chaos, because within all those personnel groupings, you're going to see similar philosophy. It's not going to be when we're in this alignment, it's a completely new defense. When we're in that alignment, it's a completely different defense. There's going to be carryover principles, carryover schemes, carryover calls that are going to make it successful. What those different alignments do is they allow you to better match up personnel-wise. That's what all those different things do. They give you the ability to attack from different angles, but you're still going to be you out of those different looks, at least the way that Marcus Freeman does it. And it's part of the reason I think he's such a great coach and why I have had so much excitement about him from the moment Clark Lee left. Vince, you remember that was my number one guy. Mm-hmm. And it was because I saw all that. I mean, when you can see a guy that is schematically brilliant, yet his players are also fundamentally sound, you say that's the kind of guy you need and want running your defense. And that's a lot of what Clark Lee was, and that's what Marcus Freeman is.
Sean also wants to know, how was your birthday?
It was great. It was great. It was so funny last night, Vince. For those who didn't know, part of my birthday was my wife and I had kind of a game day. And so I found a YouTube link that had the Miami game. It was the intro. We had to start over at the beginning because my wife was trying to talk through the intro music. And I was like, honey, I love you, but this is the CBS intro music. You do not talk over the CBS intro music. And so we had to start over. So we had a little bit of a minor, blemish, and she understood. And then she's like, "Oh, this is really good." So it was commercials and everything, and so it was a lot of fun. But the funny part is, she knew she'd never watched the game before, and it'd been a long time since I watched it start to finish. And even then, in the fourth quarter, she's like over there, like nervous. And when remember the touchdown that made it 31-30, the Andre Brown one where he rolls over and the ball goes flying, it was clearly an incomplete pass. She's going nuts. He doesn't even have the ball. That's bull crap. That's such a bad call. It was so. She was literally nervous. Like she gave me a high five at one point in time when they had a big sack late, and her hands were all clammy and sweaty.
That's hilarious.
She was getting so into the game.
That's hilarious.
So it was a lot of fun. We ate well. We relaxed. I didn't put a lot of articles out yesterday because I just wanted to. I don't get many days to just relax and enjoy life. So
it's good for you.
It was a lot of fun. So thank you, Sean, for asking. It was a lot of fun. Even though Vince bailed on me and didn't do a podcast with me.
Well, I got a gift.
I gave you a present on my birthday.
I got a gift on your birthday. I think that's pretty freaking amazing. So
Bush League.
Just saying. Marcus has more of a comment, but I love it. Great to see some players just playing and seemingly not overthinking. Mm-hmm. Already seen dramatic improvements from Luafile, Simon, Bauer, playing to their natural aggression and athleticism. We talked about that.
Agreed.
I could not agree more.
Agree.
With that as well. Jake Clampett Investments, which I think is a hilarious name. I hope you're using your company YouTube page to comment because I think that would be awesome. But anyway, hypothetical question. Where would you rank this team if this team did not have an ND uniform on it? If this roster was in any other uniform, factoring in current talent and player losses?
So that's how I always view it.
Me too.
Look, here's the thing. I'm a Notre Dame fan, but I have said from day one, and this is something some people don't understand, I'm a Notre Dame fan on my birthday when I'm sitting down relaxing with my wife watching the Notre Dame Miami game. When I'm doing podcasts, when I'm writing articles, I am doing it as best to my ability as an objective person.
Yep.
And so it does me no good professionally and I'm not saying you're saying this, but it does me no good professionally to hype up Notre Dame when it's undeserved.
Sure.
It does me no good professionally to predict Notre Dame to win every game. No, when I don't actually believe it, and then they lose all these games.
Well, yeah, it makes you look stupid.
It does. I mean, and it makes me look like a homer.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And
there's plenty of those already.
And so, to me, where Notre Dame ranks is exactly if you take off the Notre Dame, and let's just say I grew up a fan of the NFL and didn't really like college football, but I'm covering it now. My opinion, I would hope, doesn't change. Are there certain biases in there? Maybe. But I try hard not to have them.
Sure.
But honestly, I still view this as to me, Notre Dame going into the season should be a preseason at worst number 7 to 8 team in the country. And I still think they're a top 5 or 6 team in preseason rankings because yes, they have personnel losses, but Notre Dame has been consistently recruiting effectively at the positions where they've had the biggest losses. And the places where there are some depth questions also happens to be where they have their best players and mainly the safety position. So yeah, the safety position is a depth concern, but it just so happens that their best defensive player plays safety.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, again, my opinion of Notre Dame when we're doing this show, when I'm doing writing, when I'm doing anything that's professionally oriented, it is always going to be about me giving you my honest opinion about where they rank relative to the rest of college football. It would do me no good to say Notre Dame is close to being a title winner if I didn't actually believe it, because then when they go out and go 7-5 next year, you're like, wow, you're a big freaking idiot. Got one, but let's get.
I wanted this had to do with what you were talking about. That's the only reason I threw it up. Jacob says the reason some Indy fans don't agree with Coach D or talk. Yep,
out of their behinds.
Yeah, about his commentaries because you're honest, good or bad. That's what most of us love about his opinions. Forget the homers. I just wanted to throw that in there because it's right. Yeah. We're honest. Maybe to a fault at times, but that's what it is. I mean,
that's also partly our backgrounds. I mean, our coaching backgrounds. But the other part of it too, Vince, is what I learned very early on is if you give a critical take, the people that are the homers, and I'm meaning that with all due respect in this instance, they're going to be upset with you because they don't want to hear you be critical. And that's where you get that, well, you only coached at this level or whatever childish thing that they're going to say. Then when you're like, when I defended Brian Kelly because I thought people were unfairly going after him. So, like the decision against Tulsa late in the game, I'm trying to explain why he might make that call, even though it wasn't a great call. But you're just a Brian Kelly. I literally got accused a couple weeks ago of someone saying that I accept mediocrity because I had said something. Me, of all people, I was like, of all the people on the beat, you're going to accuse me of accepting mediocrity? Right. I had a guy about 3-4 months ago call me a Brian Kelly apologist. Right? Me. And
clearly does not follow what we do.
Right. So what I realized is no matter what side I take, I'm going to get criticism, which is fine. You put your opinion out in a public sphere, you deserve to allow people to be critical of it. So what I decided early on was I'm just going to give you my honest opinion. And I realize that I'm going to piss different people off with every opinion that I give, but I'm just going to be honest. And I believe that there's a market out there for that. And if I wanted to make more money, I would just be positive all the time. I mean, there's more money to be made by being everything is awesome. My wife loves doing that from the Lego movie. She's like, everything is awesome, which is okay for you to have watched because you have kids. We don't have that excuse. We just watched it as a husband and wife. So I could lie and say we took my nieces and nephews to a movie to watch it, but I'm not going to.
Having kids is a great excuse to watch kids movies, by the way.
But to the point is like, well, look, we're gonna. I feel that's the best way to be respectful to y'all is to say, look, I'm gonna give you my honest opinion. And when Brian Kelly does something to be critical of, I'm gonna say it. I criticize him for his recruiting efforts for a long time. Do you know why I'm not doing that now? Because he's doing a better job.
Absolutely,
it's not that hard to do.
Yeah, Connor, we got to get Connor in. I apologize. It should have been right away.
Yes, that's on Vince. That's on your boy, Connor. Just so you know. Yep. That's on your boy.
Oh, hurtful. Thanks for the overview of Northern Indiana. I wasn't saying Vermont is bad. I'm trying to get out of the mental hospital that is New York City.
Yes.
Look,
Amen.
I lived in Chicago for a little while, and I know Chicago is more laid back than New York City, but that was still too much hustle and bustle for me. Like that's why one of the reasons I like Indiana is because I know how long it's going to take me to get from point A to point B. and I need every one of those minutes because I will wait to the last second to leave.
Yeah.
Like that's me.
Yeah.
Like I'm more.
My
laid
wife
back
was
like
born
that.
in Long Island, and she said, "I'll never move back there." So I mean,
there's no chance.
I have a buddy who lives there, and he lives there just because that's where his family is and his job is. But I mean, there's a lot of people that would, especially now, it's getting a little bit crazy. But yes,
sure.
If you're looking to move, my man, I'm telling you, Northern Indiana really truly is a great.
You could
place.
do a lot worse.
Yeah.
You could do a lot worse.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out
real quick.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yep. Okay, Brian. Thank you for having my back on that. I appreciate that. Even though your name isn't spelled quite correctly, I do appreciate that. So yeah, let get back up to the top here. We were talking about real quick with Hey Bob 157. This is here we go. He said I could see Kerry G getting some reps, John. That was in reference to John's question about that fifth DB. Now that's an interesting. So Kerry G's an interesting one because he's going to start off at safety, but when you look at his body and you look at his skill set, you say, oh, could he be that guy? Could he be that third safety? And I don't know if he'll be that as a freshman, but I could certainly see that. And that's another reason that Prince Kollie was such an important recruit because he could also be sort of that Jack Kaiser, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. So, and then of course, as we talked about in 2022, they have Nolan Ziegler. So I'm confident that type of body type, that fifth thing which is a hybrid safety linebacker type, is going to be fine moving forward. So I don't think Notre Dame necessarily has to have a full-time thing. I think that allows them to say, okay, let's just take a third corner. And when we have to be in like a true nickel or dime and we're playing a team that throws it all day, you can just pull from that cornerback depth chart. It doesn't have to be someone to do it full time because of how well they've recruited that hybrid position.
Well, Martin wants to know, could Nolan Ziegler play safety in our
Not
defense?
the way that Kyle Hamilton plays it, but he could play it in the way that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah and those guys play it. And the reason I say that, Martin, is because I don't think that Nolan is a guy that you want playing 10, 12 yards off the ball. I think Nolan is a guy you want closer to the line of scrimmage. I think that's where he can make more impact. Now, what I would say is if Nolan's able to maintain his current level of athleticism and explosiveness while adding 20, 25, 30 pounds, he could give you a very unique type of weapon. But I don't see that weapon being someone who can play like a pure safety position. I don't see it. Now, is Nolan athletic enough to prove me wrong? Yes. It's not about necessarily athleticism. It's about what his game is best at. And his game, to me, is best when he can attack downhill and attack the ball, not someone that's playing over top in cover 2 or someone who's playing free safety in the cover 1 looks. It's get him down closer to the ball and allow his athleticism to take over.
All right,
it's a good question.
John's got a recruiting question. Do you think with the depth we have at defensive tackle that Anthony Lucas might not commit because of the lack of immediate playing time available?
That's actually a really good question, John.
I
don't think it will be an issue because, number one, there's a good chance that both of your starting interior players are going to be gone after this year. And Kurt Heinisch is gone. And if Jason Adamiola
has his 6th year, right?
Yeah, he's going to, I think, end up playing more games than any player in Notre Dame history because he actually played as a true freshman. I mean, he's played 4 years. I mean, he's been a rotation guy for 4 years.
Sure.
He's taking advantage of that COVID year. He's gone after this year. I think if Jason Adamiola is as good as we think he's going to be gone after this year. If he's not as good as we think he's going to be, then Anthony Lucas isn't going to be afraid of him.
Right.
That's my point. So I also think here's another thing that benefits Notre Dame. And this is something that, has been an issue on offense. What Notre Dame has proved in the last several years is I don't care if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, if you can play, we're going to find a role for you. Kurt Heinisch played as a freshman. Jason Adamiola played as a freshman. Myron Tungavaloa, Kurt Heinisch, all played as freshmen. They've played a lot of rookie defensive linemen. They're going to find a role for you. And if you're the best guy, you're going to start.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that Mike Elson can sell to say, hey, look, I don't care who we have coming back. If you're our best player, you're going to play. And the other part of it is because they play so many defensive linemen, Mike, the draft of the last 2 years has been a godsend to Notre Dame's defensive line recruiting. Because you can say, hey, look, we were in a solid 2 deep in 2018, and all 4 of those dudes are in the NFL now.
Right.
We're going to play depth. It's not like Dalen and Adi sat behind Julian and Khalid for 3-4 years and then got their shot and became NFL players. They were already on teams' radars because of what they did as part of a rotation.
Sure.
So I don't think – and plus he's looking at Alabama heavily too. You don't look at Notre Dame and Alabama if you're someone who's worried about the depth chart in front of you.
Who's worried about not being – right.
And so I don't think – exactly. And they're confident enough in themselves to say, hey, I don't care who's in front of me. If I'm the best guy, I'm going to be there.
So Tommy's giving me a hard time about cutting my grass yesterday. He's saying those lines better be perfect. They are. We'll see. I'll almost head over there on my way to the store here in a little bit. I think you did. And take a picture and post it, man. That's what needs to happen here.
Old Grim made a similar comment to this the other day, and he's saying it again. They are doing a great job of reloading. So what I want – this is a frustrating thing for me. In my midweek musings article today, I talked about this, that Notre Dame is 11th and 12th in the post-spring top 25 from CBS Sports and ESPN. 11th and 12th. And here's some teams ahead of them. Cincinnati, Iowa freaking State, North Carolina, and USC is like right behind Notre Dame in some of those polls. Wisconsin's right behind them. And I'm thinking, what are you smoking? You know what I mean? It's like, well, they lost 9 players. Yeah, well, look what, in 2017 they lost 2 top 10 NFL draft picks, and the next year they went undefeated. It's like there's still this thing about Notre Dame, which you should think after 4 years of being 10+ wins every single year, that people would get the point that, hey, this isn't Notre Dame of 10, 15 years ago anymore. Right. And to Old Grim's point, they're reloading. You lose Dalen Hayes and Adi Ogundeji to the NFL draft, and you replace them with Justin Adamiola, Nana, Jordan Patelho.
Sure.
You lose guys like Javon McKinley and Ben Skoranek, and you replace them with Kevin Austin, Braden Lindsey, Lawrence Keys.
That's an upgrade.
Tommy Trumbull's a 3rd-round pick. He wasn't even their number 1 tight end last year.
Right.
He was their number 2 tight end last year. So this stuff about Nick McLeod, look, they're going to be fine. And to Old Grim's point, they're reloading. And that you could take North Carolina, who went 8-4, got smacked at home by Notre Dame, lost 2,000-yard running backs, lost a 1,000-yard receiver and their best defensive player, and yet they're going to go out there and say they're going to be a top 10 team and Notre Dame isn't. That North Carolina has become the new Michigan.
It's hilarious.
That's what they are. They've become the new Michigan, where every year Michigan gets in the top 10. They're always shocked. Wow, Michigan wasn't as good as we thought they were. They were never that good. Right. You hyped them up. They never deserved that hype. And I think North Carolina is eventually going to get there. I love what Mac Brown is doing. But how about we let them actually finish in the top 10 first before we place them in the top 10? Because what happened, they got outclassed by every top 10 pro. Not outclassed, because they competed with Clemson 2 years ago. They battled Texas A&M despite not having the 2,000-yard rushers and all that. But let's let them win one of those games first before we start throwing them into the top 10. That just kind of bothers me. And that's kind of Old Grim's point is Notre Dame right now is reloading. They're not rebuilding. They're reloading. And that's why I'm more optimistic about this team than maybe some other people are.
Martin wants an explanation. Can you explain what Rover actually is? If you have a vid on this, I'll watch it. Thank you. And as always, love the content.
So Rover is essentially, so let's look at if you think about an old school 4-3 defense, Martin, and you go back to the days of the 1990 NFL, okay? And you think of, you got your 4 down linemen, you've got your 4 linebackers, you've got the Sam linebacker, the Mike and the Will, and it's kind of a 7-man box, right? And you had your traditional tight end, you had your fullback, and you played a 7-man box, and you play cover 2, and your corners, your edge support players, and then you got your safeties playing kind of the middle of the field. That was that thing. And so then came along around 2000, and then it really got going in the late 2000s and then the early 2010 decade, where in college especially started seeing teams spreading the field a lot more. So the era of the fullback and the tight end and the 2 tight end sets being the predominant offense kind of went away, and tight ends were always attached in a 9 technique, against with a 9 technique outside. That's kind of a thing of the past with most teams. And now you're seeing teams that go 11 personnel a lot. Teams will go 10 personnel a lot. Teams that will even be in a 12 personnel and spread things out. And so you'll see that. And so there became a need to where you had 2 choices. One is you could put your linebackers outside to cover the spread, which then puts you in a disadvantage personnel-wise. in those matchups against slots and running backs and things like that. Or you had to bring your safety down, which then left you exposed when it came to deep help. So, and it really started, in my opinion, the guy that mastered this and is the godfather of this is Gary Patterson. Gary Patterson came up with what he called a 4-2-5 defense. So essentially it's still the 4 down linemen. You had 2 inside backers, but then you developed what I think they called it a hero. I don't remember what their name was, but it was kind of that beginning of that hybrid player where you had a 5th defensive back, but he was more of a guy that could also play the run. He could play the perimeter pass. So he could be a force against the perimeter run and the perimeter pass. You could tuck him inside if you needed to get big. He was big enough or a good enough tackler that you could kind of bring him inside. He was like a big safety. You could bring him inside and he could then give you some run support, but he could also be a guy that could defend against the perimeter. And that's even evolved to a lot of degrees. And so now what you're seeing, like with Marcus Freeman, is you're seeing sort of that 3-3-5 look, but that rover position is more of an outside the box position. Yep. And if you look at Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, he didn't play inside the box a lot, even though he was technically a linebacker. He was an out of the box player. He's a space player. So the rover is essentially the replacement of the old school Sam linebacker. You're bringing in a more athletic player. You're bringing in a player that still allows you to have some advantages inside against the run, which Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah did, but it's more of an athletic, rangier player that allows you to play in space better. And so it was essentially an invention of Gary Patterson that allowed them to better handle the spacing with which teams did without having to go to a pure nickel defense, because it still protects you and gives you some of the benefits of being in a base defense. So hopefully that is helps. But, this is a thing that, Vince, I need to write down. I'm actually going to write this down. But this would be a great football 101 thing for the summer.
Yeah,
I think, because we are going to get to that this summer, but we wanted to get to the spring first. So this is a good one. I think that might be something that we might do.
Well, John has a super chat. Got to throw it up here. John, thank you very much for the super chat. He goes, would you rather have Kelly win a title next year, retire, and leave the program in shambles, 5 years of losing seasons, or spend the next 5 years winning 10 games a year, but with no title? And then he kind of clarified, some of the Searcher Green was kind of asking, what do you mean leave the program in shambles? John said sanctions, no title and 5 years of losing versus no title and 5 years of 10 wins, basically. So
I would take the consistency aspect of it, because I think that if we're talking about like sanctions and other things in the program shambles, then that title doesn't mean as much. And
if there's sanctions, they might even take it away.
Right. And so to me, if the option is a tainted title, then I don't want the title. I want the consistency. I think a more realistic thing for me would be Brian Kelly wins a title next year, retires, and then there's a smooth transition into where the next generation can then build on what he established.
Sure.
And that ultimately is what Brian Kelly's legacy is going to be. It's not just going to be what he does at Notre Dame. And this is one of the things that I think has hurt Lou Holtz's legacy a little bit at Notre Dame, in that he stayed too long. And some of the decisions he made at Notre Dame, whereas like Brian Kelly struggled early and then developed consistency. Lou Holtz was consistent early and then struggled, and then there wasn't sort of a clear transition to who is next. And then they hired Bob Davie, who was a bit of a backstabber, and it was just all this mess.
Yeah.
And then the program kind of wandered in the wilderness for a long time until Brian Kelly showed up, and it took him a while to kind of get him going. And then now he's got him at a level of consistency to where even if Brian Kelly stays, let's just say he stays through 2024, and Notre Dame goes 10-3 each of the next 3 seasons. So 21, 22, 23, and 24. So 4 seasons. They're going to be in a position where Notre Dame is such a far more attractive job now than when Brian Kelly took over.
Sure.
And so his legacy may not be I won, but hey, I put the program in position to where the next coach that wins a title is going to get it. And that's partly why I don't think Brian Kelly's going to play out his contract. And let me explain this here, because this brings to John's point. I'm not really on his question anymore, because I don't want I don't want either of those options. I want a third option. And that is that Brian Kelly wins even if he doesn't win a title, but let's say he gets to another playoff appearance. But the reality is they say, hey, look, we're going to allow you to sort of bring your successor in. And that's where maybe it's Marcus Freeman. If Marcus Freeman does as a coach what we think it is, and so let's say Brian Kelly never wins a title, but he retires in sort of I'm retiring so Marcus can take over, kind of like what Bob Stoops did with Lincoln Riley. Like my time is done, and there's someone here that can replace me, and I'm leaving the program in great shape.
And that was a weird way to do it, but yes, I agree with. I mean, the timing. The timing,
yes. But in his defense, it's like, look, I can't do this anymore, right? Like I'm getting ready for season, and it's just not there. But now Bob Stoops, still kind of has his DNA a little bit on Oklahoma. If Brian Kelly opens the door for Marcus Freeman to be his replacement, and Marcus Freeman goes out there and picks wins a national title, then Brian Kelly that's going to be on his legacy, in my opinion. Yes, the new head coach will be the coach that won it, but it's going to change how we view Brian Kelly, in my opinion. At least it will for me.
Well, he's going to. I believe he have to
foundation
do it pretty quickly after
within the first 2-3 years. Yes. Okay. Yes. If Marcus Freeman wins a title in year 9. It doesn't. I'm talking about winning within that first couple years.
Okay.
To your point, that's a good clarification. So, and look, somebody says, what if he picks Reese? Well, same thing if Tommy Reese wins it. Like, that's the whole point, is if he picks the successor and that successor continues to win, and if that successor can win a title, it's essentially like this. If that successor wins a title that's made up predominantly of recruits that sign with Brian Kelly, then that's going to be part of Brian Kelly's legacy, in my opinion.
I get that.
He should get credit for that. Just like some people gave Charlie Weiss credit for the 12-0 season in 2012. When you look at the depth chart and say, there's a lot of Charlie Weiss dudes that were part of that. So I think it does have to happen within those first 2-3 years to really factor. But that's preferably where I would be, John, is to have Brian Kelly create a clear succession to where it's not even just about the few years of no title, but that Notre Dame is now in a healthier place. And as much as I love Lou Holtz and he was a brilliant coach, he's part of the reason Notre Dame was left a mess and wandered, because he stayed too long, and there wasn't really a who's going to be my replacement kind of situation. And so when he left, the program was a mess. Yeah,
there was some stubbornness involved. Hey, guys, I'm going to have to take off here real quick. I have to get ready for a game. So as much as I would love to stick around with the IB family, I've got to get going. But thank you for hanging on. Love some of these comments, by the way. I'm really enjoying going through these, and I will leave you in the ultra capable hands of the former birthday boy Brian Driscoll, and I will see you guys on Friday, because it's what on Friday, Brian?
It's Friday free for all, baby. Friday free for all.
All right, guys. I'll catch you later. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you on Friday.
Going to go back up here to the top. Notre Dame 2164 asks, I hope our season isn't ruined before we figure out how to run the new offense. I honestly don't think it will be. I think, number one, the defense is going to be good enough to do that. And the second part of it is, I don't think it's going to take the offense 8-9 games to figure it out. I mean, I think Wisconsin's like, game 4? And Wisconsin's a team that I don't think you have to score 40 points to beat. I do believe that the offense will get it figured out within the first 3 games. And those are all very winnable games, even if your offense doesn't light the world on fire. So I don't think the season is going to be ruined. I mean, could we see a loss? We talked about that the other day. I could see a loss in this situation, but it's not one loss doesn't ruin your season. We've seen that with Notre Dame in the past. They lost second game of the year in 2017. They climbed all the way up to number 3 in the rankings. They lost early in 2019 and climbed up inside the top 10 before they lost to Michigan. If they'd have beat Michigan, Notre Dame's probably in the top 4. So we've seen that in the past where a loss has not completely. 2015 was another one. Notre Dame had a loss early, actually somewhat middle of the season against Clemson, and still was able to be in the top 4 before playing terrible against BC and Wake Forest, and then falling out of the top 4, and then, of course, ultimately being knocked out by a loss to Stanford. So I don't think a loss would ruin the season, and I don't see Notre Dame getting 2 losses. We talked about this the other day, and I mean, I could see a couple of those teams being capable of beating Notre Dame. I'd be shocked if 2 of them actually did. And then I think by that point in time, after that first loss, you get to the Virginia Tech game, and then there's the bye week. I think by that point in time, the offense should be cruising along pretty well. Okay. Let's see here. Get some of these other questions. We've already kind of done a lot of these. All right, so very good questions. Looks like Vince worked through a lot of these questions here real quick. We got the Rover question. Okay, Jay says we still haven't seen what Chance Tucker can do at Notre Dame. I'm excited for the corner play. I agree, Jay, and I would also throw JoJo Johnson in there. I saw a picture of JoJo the other day, and he looks absolutely ripped up from that, absolutely. Old Grim says the 3-minute clips didn't show us as much a corner. I would say that's true to a degree, but the thing that I looked for is when corners are getting beat in plays, how did they play the ball? How did they, were they in good position? How were they tackling? Were they able to make plays on the ball? We could see a little bit, but not. I mean, we couldn't learn a whole lot from those 3-minute clips, period. But that's why I put so much with the corner position. I put so much on my sources, but then also seeing that in the blue gold game, it confirmed a lot of the things that I was being told by my sources, which is it's still very much a work in progress, but they definitely made steady growth throughout the spring. All right, here we go. This is a good question from John DeCrisio. What physical and mental traits make a good safety versus the traits that make a good cornerback other than coverage skills? I honestly don't think, well, overall, there isn't really much difference from a physical and mental trait standpoint. If you have the mental traits to play safety, you can play corner if your physicality is there, if you have the physical traits. And I think that one of the traits that are different for a cornerback, and it's not just about coverage skills, but it's the physical traits that lead into being good coverage skills. A lot of safeties aren't quite as fluid and smooth, and the transition ability. Transition is basically the ability to go from either a back pedal, which some teams still do. Nick Saban doesn't teach back pedal. They kind of do a side thing. But even then, you have to be able to open and run. And the fluidity and the smoothness and the cleanness with which you can do that. I've seen 4-4 corners that had trouble covering because they would always be tight in their transitions. And then you can beat them. And then there's other corners that are 4-5, 4-6 guys that are really smooth players. So they're always playing at full speed, and that allows them to be effective. So although speed is important, I think to me, the agility, flexibility, your ability to bend, your ability to open up and run with really smooth, fluid transitions. If you have tight hips, you're going to have trouble playing cornerback in a team on a defense that asks guys to cover. I think some of the mental traits that separate a safety from a corner is very much focused on sort of his job and immediately inside. Okay, so a cornerback has to not only cover his guy, but if you're playing zone or even part of a pattern match zone, which is kind of a hybrid man zone that Alabama runs, you're pedaling. You've got to keep your eyes in on that number 2 receiver, right? And if I'm dropping and I'm in zone, if I'm dropping and I'm covering this guy deep, if an outcut comes, I've got to take that outcut, and then the safety's going to see that. And so the safety's got his eyes on number 2. He sees that guy go on an outcut. He then opens up and runs and takes the vertical route. Then I, as a cornerback, have to be able to play that. But that's kind of my wheelhouse, right? It's that guy in front of me, that guy right inside. A safety has to be able to see so much more of the field and has to react to more. There's more things that will influence what a safety does. He has to be able to key the running back in some instances. He has to be able to key the line in some instances. He has to fit off of guys in front of him. So like a cornerback as a tackler doesn't have to fit. I mean, you have run support. You're the support player, which means you either tackle a guy or you funnel him back inside. Some defenses will have a corner spill and they run him to the sideline, but most will kind of say, hey, you got to if you can't make the tackle, you got to force that guy back inside where all of our help is. Whereas a safety has to come in and fit. So a fit is essentially, if I'm the safety and I'm behind the rover, okay, and they're running a bubble screen, and the rover goes underneath the blocker, all right? So he's fitting inside, which is usually wrong. I have to make him right by then fitting outside. If he goes outside, I have to fit inside. That's a run fit. And so if you're playing behind linebackers, if the linebacker gets blocked by an outside blocker, I have to then protect him and go outside and take that. If he goes over top of that blocker, then I have to fit behind him to make sure that that we've protected that. So a safety has a lot on his plate when it comes to knowing what's happening with everybody. The safety has to make a lot of the calls because he can see things that are happening pre-snap and post-snap, where a corner is more of the one getting the call. Now, there are times when corners will communicate to the other people, but it's usually the safety that are making the checks, the coverage changes, and those type of things. So I think mentally there's a big difference. Safety, physically, I think ideally you want a safety that can do all the things that a corner can do. Mentally, there's a lot of different changes, and you can protect a safety that lacks some certain physical tools more so than you can a corner. So I hope that answers your question. Matt Carter asks, thoughts on Litchfield Adjuvant and how he might make an impact this fall. And he was often the target of losses in the videos that we saw. He wasn't making a whole lot of plays in the videos. I thought he played well in the game, though. I thought he was laying wood. I mean, he was hitting people. He blew up Joe Wilkins in the end zone and knocked that ball out. He had another big hit near the line of scrimmage. I think the problem with Litchfield is Litchfield's kind of built like a corner, but he plays more like a strong safety. And he's not a guy that, to me, is someone you want to cover a lot. If they can put him in situations where he can be a run support player, an alley player, I think there's a role for Litchfield. But he's going to be, in my opinion, a little bit more limited in some of the things he can do. All right. Michael Morris says, I don't think Kyle Hamilton has come close to hitting his stride. Do you think offenses can play around him? And what corner do you think needs to step up? So, yes, I do think teams can try to defend against playing around Kyle Hamilton, but the way that Marcus Freeman, from what I understand, is teaching safeties is Kyle's going to be the field safety and Houston's going to be the boundary safety, but they're both learning those positions, which allows them to be somewhat interchangeable. That is an important thing that they've made very clear to the safeties, is you can't just learn one, you have to learn them both. And then that allows Marcus Freeman to move Kyle Hamilton around more to say, hey, look, if you want to try to game plan away from him, then we have things we can do, with him to protect him, to make sure that you can't avoid him. But then that also obviously is going to put pressure on other players and allow other players to make up for that. Last year, if you tried to avoid Kyle Hamilton, it usually meant you were running to Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah or vice versa. This year, they're not going to have that second elite, second or third level player, at least as of right now. And that's why it's so important that Jack Kaiser emerge and that Shane Simon emerge and those type of players. As far as the corner that needs to step up, I don't think it's one. I think Cam Hart and Tariq Bracy both need to continue stepping up. It's important that you have three cornerbacks. John A1 says, what school did you coach at in North Carolina? I didn't coach at a school in North Carolina. I actually played my freshman year of college at a college in North Carolina. And then transferred out of there and went to Salisbury in Maryland. So that's what took me to North Carolina. Now I coached against teams in North Carolina. It was Christopher Newport, but I never coached at a college in North Carolina. Demetrius Rex says South Bend is a great town compared to other Midwestern towns, coming from a Northwestern Ohio local. I would agree. I'm also a Northwestern Ohio guy. I was born in Lime, Ohio, so I would agree with that. I very much, and I like Northern Indiana. I like the South Bend, Granger. We live in Granger, which is kind of right on the outskirts of South Bend. Vince and I and Lou actually. So Vince and I lived in a neighborhood on one side of the street, and then the street ran between us, and on the other side was another neighborhood. That's where Lou lived. So we all kind of lived together, but it's a very quiet area, lots to do. You're 10, 15 minutes away from all the things. I like it here. And like I said, I've lived in a lot of different places. Okay. Marcus, Notre Dame 2164. Which part of the defense does Freeman's defense need to be strong to succeed? He answered this question perfectly. And he said, it's the defensive line. I mean, look, if they don't have a great front, if they don't have an active, productive front, then they're not going to be an elite defense. They can still be good. But I think, to take it even further, the first two levels of the defense have to be elite for this defense to be good. They're going to be aggressive with their coverages. They're going to play a lot more man. And I don't care who you have at cornerback. You could have the two best corners in the country. If your defense isn't really good up front, then A, teams are just going to run on you. And two, even the best cover players can't cover for long periods of time all the time. If you can't put pressure on the quarterback, if you can't be disruptive on the ball, eventually you're going to play teams that can match you personnel-wise on the perimeter, and they're going to be able to beat you. And that's why it is so important to hear that. Here we go. All right, John Thomas Walsh says, "What's the word on John the Door? Does he have his juice back this spring? Ended pretty rough last year." Thomas, is too early to tell. I couldn't answer that. In honesty, practice doesn't matter. We're not going to know that till he gets out in games, and if we can see him being more consistent when it comes to his success in games, We're just not going to know that right now. It's too early to know that. Here's a good question. Notre Dame 2164 says, other than Kyle Hamilton, who is Notre Dame's best defender this year? It's a really good question. I think if we looked at last year, like who was the best defenders last year, it'd be Kurt Heinisch, it would be Drew White is in that conversation. I think those are the guys that I would say would fit that mold as far as who's the best guy. As I project into 2021, I think Notre Dame's best players beyond Kyle Hamilton is going to be some combination of Jason Adamiola, Isaiah Foskey, Myron Tungavaloa, and Jack Kaiser. That's just my opinion. That would be who I would project to be that. But I think we're going to also see, we're going to see other guys. I mean, guys are going to flash, and that's the key is you need your base top players to perform well. But the difference between the really good defenses and the great defenses are each week somebody else is going to step up and make plays that help you in games, and that's going to be the key. Especially to an earlier question, when teams are avoiding Kyle Hamilton or they're avoiding, let's say, Jack Kaiser or Isaiah Foskey or somebody like that, then you have to have guys who can then come in and say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and make I'm going to go in and make my play. I'm going to make my, and I think that's what made Notre Dame the last couple of years so good is because one week it's Jeremiah Wusu making a game-changing play. The next week it's Adi Ogundeji. The next week it's Dalen Hayes. The next week it's Kyle Hamilton. And when you can have that, it's going to allow you to be very, very, very effective. Michael Johnson says, I've listened to the Sirius crowd, and that's a Sirius XM radio, and they don't seem to see Notre Dame as a top 15 team. What the F are they looking at? It's all people like that, in my opinion, Michael, it's all about ratings. It's all about saying that little hot take that gets people talking about their show, gets people like you come and ask people like me about it. To me, it's nonsense. My dad listens to Sirius XM radio, and he's constantly calling me about similar things and complaining about it. I'm like, these people say dumb things all the time. Why do you continue to listen to them? Anyone that doesn't think Notre Dame is a top 15 team is still thinking that this is Notre Dame from 10, 15, 20 years ago. And those people aren't serious analysts. They're not. To me, if you want to argue they're 10, 11, 12, I don't agree with it, but I can understand it. But for me, with what Notre Dame has done in recent seasons, if somebody doesn't think they're top 15, then that person's just saying things. Either A, the person does not know what they're talking about, or B, they're saying it for effect. They're saying it for shock value, which sadly is what a lot of our commentary in sports and politics has become. It's no longer honest, objective analysis that you can choose to engage in ideas. It's more of hot takes. It's the Skip Bayless nonsense as opposed to someone giving real analysis. And, those are the people that tend to get paid, and that's what people want. They want to get paid. So they choose to go those things. All righty. Bevan O'Neill, who is the third string Viper? Right now, Bevan, I don't know if they have one. I think that Devin Upau probably is the leader of the clubhouse going into fall camp because he played there. But we saw Osita Ekwonu playing some Viper this spring. He's now listed as a defensive end on the depth chart. That would mean that maybe that they feel they're not ready for the freshman to take over. And then, of course, Will Schweitzer got hurt, which would hurt it a little bit more. So, maybe that's a role that Osita Ekwonu can jump into and have an opportunity to kind of have a niche there as a really athletic edge player. I don't know if that's going to be a full-time move for him or not, but I think that's right now is to be determined type of situation. Let's see here. Great comment, Tommy, about the D3 or 2 in the Xbox and PlayStation. I'm not going to put it up, but that is a phenomenal comment. Lauren Hamilton asks, thank you, Lauren, with current depth chart on both sides, would Hunter Spears have a better chance of getting playing time at offensive line or defensive line? I still have never gotten an answer, Lauren, about why he was moved to the offensive line in the first place. I don't know if it was injury related or what, but I would have loved to have seen him get an opportunity to develop as a nose tackle. Hunter Spears was one of my favorite defensive line recruits the last 5 years. He was so good in high school when he was healthy. But I think that's kind of the thing, Lauren, is that his inability to stay healthy has hindered his ability to really push for a spot at either place. I think the depth chart is, to your question, the depth chart is probably better for him to push at offensive line if he was healthy, but his skill set is best at nose tackle, to where I felt if he was still playing there, he could have helped, especially with some of the injuries they had this past year. I really believe Hunter could have played there. The issue is, he's been banged up. He had multiple knee injuries, I believe, in high school. Definitely had one, and he didn't play this spring. He was hurt all spring. So I don't know where his current status stands, but I still would have liked to have seen Hunter get a chance to play on the defensive line. Okay. Thomas Walsh has hit the like button. I appreciate that. Definitely would like to have that. The Trek reviewer says Notre Dame's last 2 Rovers are both in the NFL. And not only that, but they were also 4th-round picks or higher. Drew Tranquil was a 4th-round pick. Now, and Jeremiah Wusu-Koroma was a 2nd-round pick. Now, here's the difference, though. Drew Tranquil wasn't drafted as a Rover. Drew Tranquil was drafted more for what he did as an inside linebacker in 2018. I don't think Drew would have been able to play in space the way that Jeremiah Wusu did. He was more of an inside linebacker guy. But to your point, I mean, look, Drew in his 1 year as a Rover had 10.5 tackles for loss. And remember, he had a big interception against Georgia as well, playing a coverage. So he was a very unique player. But yes, you're absolutely right. And I wouldn't be shocked if someday we see Jack Kaiser getting drafted. Okay. We got to John's question. John, I hope I answered that question appropriately. The one, and I very, very much appreciate the super chat. But I hope I answered that question. If you'd like to ask it a different way or kind of a follow-up, please feel free. I'd love to. I think that's a really interesting, especially off-season conversation to have. All right, Sean McArdle says, is Heinisch or Cross big enough to anchor a 3-3-5? Okay, so this is a very good question. Now, your thought is coming from, I assume, correct me if I'm wrong here, that you're thinking of they're playing nose, and the thought of a nose is traditionally that he's a bigger Lewis Nix type of, you look at Terrence Cody and guys like that at Alabama, that 2-gap player. The thing about Notre Dame's 3-3-5 is they are not a gap-eating defensive line, so they don't have to anchor per se. How they're going to anchor is not so much size and the actual anchoring where you've got to take on 2 guys. And what it means to anchor is, so if I'm a nose tackle, right, and Lewis Nix was great at that, and I love using him as an example because he was, I think a lot of people's one of their favorite players. But he was so big and strong that he could come off the ball, and if you had 2 guys on him, he could just stay right there. You weren't going to move him. And that allowed Manti to, so he could occupy 2 blockers, and that allowed Manti to kind of run. And when you look at the Pitt game, for example, when Lewis didn't play in the first half, Pitt was getting up to Manti and chopping him the whole game. And that's why Pitt had so much success. Lewis came back in the second half, played a little bit, and that's when the defense started being able to make more plays. That's not how this 3-down look will be. This will be more of an attacking, penetrating line game, so a lot of slant. So you'll see a lot more. So one thing I've said before, and it fits here, is you're almost always against teams that will run, you're almost always going to have a 4th guy inserting, whether it's an outside linebacker, an inside linebacker. You're going to have somebody coming downhill and inserting at the snap. And they're going to do a lot of line games. So you may have the nose slanting this way, the linebacker comes off of him, the nose loops, the end comes in. They're going to do a lot of things like that. They're not going to be asking those guys to just come off and say, you've got the A-gaps. And that's what 2-gap means, is I got to be strong enough to be able to play both A-gaps. They're not going to ask their noses to do that. So I don't think they need to be big enough to do that. Can they hold their ground at times? Heinisch can, yes. Cross is not a guy you're going to have to do that. Whenever Clark Lee asked him to anchor even a little bit, he got knocked off the ball. I think Mike Elson and Marcus Freeman both understand that you can't ask him to do that. He has to be allowed to attack. That's where getting Lacey back healthy will be important because he gives you a second bigger body to help. And that's also why in my midweek musings, one of the guys I talked about as a sophomore that could really have an impact is Aiden Keanaaina, because he's 6'3", 312. He can anchor. So if you're in a game against Wisconsin, or if Stanford goes back to what they're used to be, or you're playing a team that's really good at running the football, you have a young kid with some ability to say, hey, we're going to play Aiden more this game because we need a nose that can anchor. And then you can even move, if you're going to be in a 4-down look, you can move Heinisch out to 3 technique and play him there if you wanted to really get big inside. So I do think if they need to anchor, you're going to see more of Heinisch, Lacey, and Keanaaina playing nose, and Howard wouldn't be doing that. Again, in their base defense, however, which is going to be more attacking, you're going to see more of Howard Cross. Okay. Oh, Liam Gaming says Freeman is a big proponent of man-to-man. Will he start out with more conservative approach until everyone gets their footing, especially the O if it struggles? No, I don't think so. I think if anything, it'll double down on his desire to be more aggressive, because if the offense is struggling, the last thing you want to do is be conservative and let teams kind of move the ball up and down the field. You want to create mistakes. You want to give your offense short fields, which means attack, turnovers, do those types of things. Will they alter how much they play press man? Maybe, but I don't think they're going to go away from playing a lot of man coverage. I think they're going to want those guys to go out and improve and battle and challenge and, force quarterbacks to have to read down the field. You don't allow quarterbacks to get in early rhythms of throwing hitches and quick outs and slants and slides and things like that, which can happen if you're playing off coverage. Make that quarterback, if you're going to beat me, you're going to have to beat me throwing the ball down the field. In order to throw the ball down the field, your offensive line is going to have to protect your quarterback, and we don't think you can do either one of those things. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Okay, let's get back up here. They just booted me down. Okay, Casey Martinez with a 3-3-5. Should we start recruiting guys like Lewis Nix to stuff the middle of the line? I think that Casey, I'd refer kind of this. The reason I brought this up is because it refers back to what we just talked about with the previous question that was answered before, which is I don't think that's the kind of that Sean McArdle asked. That's not the kind of 3-down defense they're doing. Look, even back when 3-4 was a really popular thing, there were two types of 3-4s. There was the 3-4-2 gap, which is what Notre Dame ran with Bob Diaco, but then there was a 3-4-1 gap, which is more of an attacking, penetrating defense. This defense finds more of its roots in that aggressive penetrating, which does not require you to have a big nose. I don't think that's needed as a full-time thing. Now, if you can find a guy that's a decent athlete like Aiden Keana or Gabriel Rubio that are bigger bodies that can play a little bit of a versatile game, that's great, but you don't need a 320-plus pound nose tackle to just eat up space. That's not what this defense is going to be about. Let's see here. Martin Dem, this is an interesting one. If Kelly's legacy is Marcus Freeman, and what he's saying here is that Kelly leaves at some point in time, Marcus Freeman takes over and wins a title, I would imagine somewhat soon. Should Kelly get a statue? That's a very interesting question. I'd be curious to hear what people think about that, because I part of me says, the guy that actually wins the title should be the one to get that. But at the same time, Brian Kelly was in a different situation. It had been I don't know if Notre Dame ever had the kind of success, the sustained mediocrity that they had from the end of the Lou Holtz era to the beginning of the Brian Kelly era. I don't know if they've ever had that long. They've never gone that long without winning a title. I'm pretty sure of that. So his situation that he inherited was completely different. And if he stays 13 years and, he ends his career with like 6 straight 10+ win seasons, and then Marcus Freeman takes over and, wins a title in 22, 23 or 24, does Kelly get a statue? Do both of them get a statue? I think it'd be a very interesting debate. Very, very interesting debate. And I could make a case on both of them. So I'd like to hear what people think about that. Okay. Searcher Green says, doesn't he pass Newt this year? Yes, but he also coached way, way more games. So yes, he will pass him. But again, it's kind of like Ian Book being, in the passing numbers. It's different era, right? So right now, if Brian Kelly wins 9 games, it means he lost 3 or even 4. When Newt Rockne was coach, if Notre Dame won 9 games, they were usually undefeated. So it's a different era. And that's why I like looking at win percentage. And he also died tragically while kind of still in his prime. I prefer win percentages. And when you look at win percentages, Brian Kelly, I think, is like 5th or 6th at Notre Dame in win percentage, because it takes into account all of those type of things. See here. Oh, here's a good one. Okay, Dan Squatch. While I got y'all here, I'm just a Florida State fan doing my scouting. Appreciate you being part of the show, Dan. What unit on defense is y'all's biggest unknown? Right now, I think it's sort of the secondary as a whole. Even though Kyle Hamilton is a great player, there's still questions about how good can Houston Griffith be at the other safety spot. Can the corners be good enough to play the kind of coverage that Marcus Freeman wants? can they go 5 DBs when they need to? What if there's an injury? If someone's not playing well, do they have the depth? I think still right now the secondary as a whole, outside of Kyle Hamilton, is Notre Dame's biggest question. I think the defensive line looks great. Linebacker, I'm pretty confident in, even though the one will spot is one that is a little bit of a concern. But Drew White comes back a Mike, and if he gets beat out, Bo Bauer's gonna have to be pretty good to beat him out. Rover, I think they're gonna be good with Jack Kaiser. Shane Simon and Maris Luafau will at least be a solid, serviceable at will linebacker. The big questions for me still remain the secondary, primarily the cornerback position. They had good springs, but they still have a lot to prove, and we got into that a little bit earlier in the show. All right, Jordan Schreiber says, can you talk about Tyler Buchner's throwing motion from the spring game? Did he smooth out the new delivery or go back to the old delivery? Was he as good short or long? He still has some kinks he's working out. He has finally found, to me, the middle ground between the two throwing motions. I was fine with his old throwing motion, to be honest with you. Jordan, if you've listened to me long enough, you know that I'm not someone who wants to tinker with a throwing motion, especially for someone who's as good as Tyler Buchner. I only tinker with it if there's a problem that needs to be addressed. They took something that to me wasn't broken and broke it. That's what we saw from Tyler last summer. It appears that he's now more comfortable with it. The problem that he's going to have, I think it's something that he has said was meant to help make him more accurate on shorter throws. The problem, however, is that it has led to a tendency where at times, especially when he can't really wind up and throw, it causes him to not get as much power on downfield throws. That concerns me because the one thing Tyler Buchner could do phenomenally well before they altered with his throwing motion is he had a very powerful arm down the field. Now it's a little bit more inconsistent. We've seen some throws during 7-on-7s and 1-on-1s where he can really get the core involved and really drive off his back leg and get that in there and just rip off deep balls. But then we saw in the game on Saturday, the blue gold game, where he tries to throw a deep ball, but he's not able to really get his whole body. He doesn't really get that torque into the throw, and he woefully underthrows Braden Lindsey. Those are some of my concerns. We're short to intermediate, he looks good, but the deep stuff is the thing that right now is still a little bit inconsistent because he's still adapting to that. He's still adapting to that throw-in motion, and hopefully it continues to evolve. Omar Austin asks, what position does Prince Collie fit into in Freeman's defense? So my understanding is they're going to start him off a rover. I would definitely give him a shot to be a rover. But one of the things I liked about Prince is I think he could play outside or inside. If they don't like him at rover, I certainly think he could play will in this defense. There's no question. I think he could be a Mike in this defense. I think Prince Collie's the kind of guy that has the athleticism and the power combination that is similar to what Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had. The difference is Prince is going to show up as big, if not bigger, than Jeremiah Owusu was as a senior. I mean, Jeremiah was barely 200 pounds when he arrived. Prince is going to show up at least 210 to 215 pounds. So I think that's a difference. And I'm very excited to see just where he ends up. But part of the excitement about him, Omar, is I don't think there's just one position he can fit into. I think he can play multiple positions in this defense. I think it's going to be about where is he most comfortable, and number one, and then number two, what position is going to allow him to get on the field the fastest. That is part of it, in my opinion. Casey Martinez says, ability to scan the offense just as much as quarterback does for the defense. Our safety play is crucial for our success. I think in modern football, safety play is crucial for anybody. I think the thing that I like about Marcus Freeman's defense, and this isn't pushing back on your comment, Casey, this is building off of it, is I think at times Clark Lee put too much on the shoulders of the safeties. Whereas now there's going to take some of that burden off and put some of that burden, especially against the run game, on the linebackers. And that's going to allow Notre Dame to be a more effective football team defensively against the run and the pass. Now, Notre Dame went through a stretch last year where they were running the ball. They were stopping the run really well, and that faded down the stretch. I think that taking a little bit off the safety's plate is going to be good for the defense. Bevan O'Neill asks, all right, let me get to his question. Here we go. Bevan O'Neill, if we get Arch Manning, we will win a national championship. You agree? He's a sophomore in high school. Look, if his name was Arch Jones and he was the same exact player and from the same exact high school and he wasn't a Manning, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. And that's just, to me, there's not a sophomore in high school that I'm going to look at and say, yep, Notre Dame gets that guy, they're going to win a national championship. That's so incredibly unfair to that kid. Number one. Number two, there's a few quarterbacks that I look at and say, this kid has a chance to be a special player. Dante Moore, I've talked about. This is a loaded quarterback class. It's not an Arch Manning or bust type of situation. They're not going to get Arch Manning. I'll be shocked if they get Arch Manning. I'll be shocked if Arch Manning takes an official visit to Notre Dame ever. Maybe he comes as part of a Midwestern swing, but look, focus on other quarterbacks, not just on Arch Manning. Okay, number one. Number two, he's a sophomore in high school. Let's let the kid physically develop, because right now, if you put him at Notre Dame right now, no, they're not winning a national championship because he's a sophomore in high school. I want to see him develop first, which is also, I want to see Dante Moore develop. I want to see Malachi Nelson develop. I want to see a lot of these quarterbacks develop. They're still young. I love the potential, but they're still young. Okay. Liam Games, I hope Lacey doesn't get buried in depth. He has that tough as dirt mentality like Heinz. I agree. And that's why I think we'll see a deep rotation next year at nose guard. Omar, I feel your pain. I get where people are coming from and the name, and it's a combination of the name and the fact that a lot of fans rightfully believe that quarterback is the thing holding Notre Dame back from being a national champion. So I do understand it. And then you have this kid who comes from a lineage of great championship quarterbacks, and you kind of get excited. But I get what you're saying. I just say there's other guys that can do that, and it's not just there's a guy on the roster already that I think can do that. But I get it, and you know we'll see what happens. David L says, "Do you see any position changes for fall camp?" You know, I could see a scenario, and I don't know if I'd go there yet, and I hope that it doesn't happen. But I could see a scenario in which maybe a corner moves to receiver if there's another injury, maybe there's a summer injury at receiver, or somebody's not developing physically coming along the way that they hope, or there's a transfer. I'm not predicting any of those things. I'm just saying hypothetically, if those things happen, I could see a corner, one of the corners or safeties who played receiver, a JoJo Johnson, Ramon Henderson, somebody like that that's played receiver moving over. Beyond that, any position changes would be within your position, going from a Will to a Mike or a Mike to a Will, or, three technique to nose, tackle to guard, stuff like that. I think most of that stuff would be within your position group. I don't see anything big happening unless there is a further development that we don't know about just yet. Okay. Thomas Wall says, in my opinion, big mistake if they don't get Lacey snaps. He's a classic nose guard run stuffer and can get inside pass rush. Healthy with snaps, he's a beast. Would be better than Heinisch, in my opinion. I think he could be, but again, the whole thing is, you said if healthy. The reason that Notre Dame did not play Jacob Lacey as much in 2020 is because he was never healthy. It was not a decision based on wanting to get another player in there. It wasn't based on anything other than Jacob Lacey wasn't healthy. And when you talk about big guys and shoulder problems, that can get tricky, and those don't always come back healthy. So I do believe that yes, he could be very good, but he's got to be healthy. And that's the only reason they didn't play him a ton last year. I mean, they played him. I'm actually going to look this up now that we're talking, because I am curious about this. I'd be very curious to see what his snaps were in 2020 as a sophomore compared to what his snaps were in 2021 or 2019 as a freshman, because it didn't seem like he played as much this past year. And again, a big part of that was he just wasn't healthy. So this year in 12 games, Jacob Lacey played 149 snaps. In 2019, as a true freshman, he played 247. So just under 100 fewer snaps in one fewer game. So again, that was about his health, pure and simple. And if he's healthy, they're going to play him. I believe that. All right. Connor Patton with the joke of the day. My top picks for the next head coach: Chad Morris, Don Brown, Brian Van Corder. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. Joe says, I think that the schedule is manageable. We have an elite defense, improving offense, and the only thing that's lacking is the special teams. Let them run. I would say there's a little bit more than that, and I would say that I do wish people would clarify the difference between the coverage units and the return units. Notre Dame's special teams coverage units the last 2 years have been exceptional, in my opinion. They're kicking game operation with Jonathan Dorr has been inconsistent, but that's more of in Jonathan Dorr's head. The issue on special teams is the return game, and the return game and the coverage are two different things. And we have to not lump them all together because Notre Dame is already really good at two things. Their net punt average is exceptional because of how good of a punter Jay Bramlett is. Now, he doesn't get the boomers, but he gets great hang time. He's more consistent than Tyler Newsome was. And it's hard to get a return against Jay Bramlett. The kickoff coverage is exceptional. Their return area is where they need work. And then obviously Jonathan Dorr's mental consistency. A lot of Jacob Lacey talk. Let's see here. Michael Moore said yesterday you said that the offensive guard that's Dylan Gibbons that went to Florida State would give them Notre Dame's playbook. Does that really happen? I think that is crap. I'm not saying he did it. What I said was, I'll make sure that we're clear, is Notre Dame has to assume he did, because you can't take the chance of, well, no, he wouldn't do that. That he's not going to give them the playbook, because his loyalties are no longer to your program. His loyalties are now to Florida State. And if they want this playbook and they ask for it and he gives it to them, you have to be prepared for that. So I'm not accusing Dylan Gibbons of anything. I'm simply telling you what happens in coaching. Look, I've been in situations where we have coached against teams where one of their assistants or coordinator is one of our former coaches. You have to assume that they're going to have the signals and they're going to know the calls. So you have to adjust and adapt that week. That's what I'm saying. You have to assume it happened so that way you can be prepared for it in case it does. And if it doesn't, then you're still fine, but you've made the adjustments. So I hope that we're clear on that. I'm not saying he did it. I'm not accusing Dylan of anything. I'm telling you, as a coach, this is what has always happened. You always have to be prepared for whether it be a transfer or a coach going to another school. You have to assume that is something that other teams are going to have, and you have to act accordingly, is what I'm saying. John Climax says, I agree we don't have a name at the second level of D, but as a whole, I think they are faster. The linebackers could be scary. Kaiser impressed me and could be that guy. Marison Simon still got to show me. And I agree. There's a lot of guys that got to show me. I think the potential of the second level is very, very good. I just think right now it's still a bit of a I need to see him do it in games more, I think is where I'm at, John, is there's a lot of potential. And especially with Jack Kaiser and Drew White, Bo Bauer combination, and even Simon and Maris Lilifau, there's a lot of talent there, but those guys got it. Those guys got to show it. Jordan Schreiber, thank you so much for the super chat, Jordan. I appreciate that very, very much. Best ND team, hungry players and coaches with an easier recent schedule with no Goliath plus W. Most of the tougher teams being at home. Why ND loses one game? Okay, so I agree with everything you're saying. I think this is a chance to be one of Notre Dame's best teams from a talent standpoint from across the board. I don't know if they have as many elite high-level players as some past teams, but they're close. They do have elite players. I think that Kyle Hamilton's an elite player. Michael Mayer's an elite player. I think Kyron Williams isn't far from being an elite player. I think that there's some defensive linemen that could be elite players. At the very least, they can be an elite group. So they have the high-level talent, and the depth is much better. The reason that we say I could see them losing a game is because it is incredibly hard to go undefeated. I mean, look, here's the deal. I'm going to pull this up because this is really Nick Saban's first national championship at Alabama was an undefeated team, right? They went 14-0 in 2009. Okay, in 2011, they won a national title, lost a game in the regular season. 2012, they won a national title, lost a game in the regular season. 2013 and 2014, they lost games in the regular season. 2015, they won a national title and had a regular season loss. 2017, they won a national title and had a regular season loss. This past year, Alabama went undefeated. So Nick Saban won 4 titles in between his first title and his most recent title, and every single one of them, they lost a game in the regular season. It is incredibly, incredibly hard to win to go undefeated. When you look at, for example, Clemson, when they won their first national title in 2016, they had a loss. Ohio State, when they won their national title in 2014, they had a loss in the regular season. The reason I say I think Notre Dame will lose a game is because it is hard for me to say that a team is going to have back-to-back regular seasons undefeated. I'm trying to look at Alabama right now, and Nick Saban has yet to have an back-to-back undefeated regular seasons. I'm looking through it now. 2 losses, regular season loss, regular season loss. regular season loss. Yeah, Nick Saban, in his tremendous career at Alabama, has never had back-to-back regular season undefeated season. Now, actually, no, he has. So in 2008 and 2009, they went undefeated in the regular season, meaning first game to last game. In 2008, they lost to Florida in the SEC title game, then lost to Utah in the Sugar Bowl. So technically, they went undefeated, but that was 08 and 09. In the dominance since then, Nick Saban has never had back-to-back regular season undefeated teams. So that's what we're asking Notre Dame to do this year, is to have back-to-back undefeated regular season, which is something that Nick Saban hasn't done in over a decade. So look, in Ohio State in 2018, their only loss was to a Purdue team that was barely 500. In 2017, they lost to they got blown out by a 5-loss Iowa team. When you play a good schedule, even with no Goliath, when you play a good schedule, it's hard to run the table week after week. There's injuries that come up. Other teams just have that week where they're just playing out of their minds, like Iowa did to Ohio State, like Purdue did to Ohio State. If Purdue played as well against every team that they played as they played against Ohio State, they go undefeated. They lost like 6 games that year, 6 or 7 games that year. So it's just one of those things that happens, and it's hard to go undefeated. And the only way you can really go undefeated with any consistency in the regular season is in a situation like Clemson, for example, where they play pretty weak schedules, not by choice because the ACC stinks. Well, this year, Clemson lost a regular season game because they had to play a team in Notre Dame that they hadn't really played a whole lot. They don't play that very often. And when they did play big regular season games, it would always be early, like Georgia or Auburn, very early in the year. They can prepare for it. And so Notre Dame's schedule is not as soft as the typical Clemson schedule. It's just not. And that's why I say it is very, very hard to go undefeated when you play even a good schedule. You don't even have to play an elite schedule. You have to play a good schedule. Ohio State plays a good Big Ten schedule. Alabama plays a tough schedule every year. Just being in the SEC West makes it a tough schedule. So that's why I would say that. I mean, I get your point and I agree with everything you're saying, but it's hard to go undefeated. It really is. Okay, wrapping up these last few questions, trying to get to these. Thomas Walsh says, I met the Lacey family at 2018 Ball State game. Great people and still stay in touch. Yes, I have had a chance to meet Jacob Lacey's father. I've never met his mother. And his dad is a really, really good guy. Really good guy. Good family. And yeah, he's an easy kid to root for because Jacob's a really good kid too. But again, Jacob's healthy, he will play. John A1 says, who impressed you the most in the defensive coaching staff? I think it's loaded with Elson, Mickens, Freeman, and O'Leary. I don't know if there's one coach that impressed me the most. I think Mike Mickens probably did the best coaching job this spring. When you look at the concerns that we had about corner coming into the spring, and then how well they played across the board, I think it speaks volumes to the job that Mike Mickens did this spring. And that's partly why I have a little bit more confidence in the cornerback position going in the fall than maybe I should because of the lack of experience and the lack of proven production. But I just have a great deal of confidence in Mike Mickens that he's going to be able to get those guys ready. So I'm incredibly impressed by the job Mike Mickens has done. All right, Glenn Charles with the bold statement. I like it, Glenn. I think this is going to be one of the best defensive teams in all of college football. Definitely not top 5, no less than top 7. Best rushing defense in the country. It's just up to the back end. I mean, there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I mean, the back end has to step up and play well. And I don't know if I'm ready to predict that in May, but I don't know if I'm ready to predict that for anybody in May. Would I be shocked if Notre Dame has a top 5 defense this year? No, I wouldn't. And look, Glenn, I mean, I don't know. This is the first time I think you've left the chat. I don't know if you're new to the channel, but we've been talking about this for a while, that if some things fall into place, and to your point, a lot of those things are on the back end. If those things fall into place, if Houston Griffith is as good as we think, if Cam Hart can step up, if Tariq Bracy can get his confidence back and be a more consistent player, do I think this can be a top 5 defense? Absolutely. They've got a tremendous defensive coordinator. They've got, in my opinion, one of the best defensive line coaches in the business. And in my opinion, Mike Mickens is a very underrated and up-and-coming cornerbacks coach. And I would not be shocked if, when Marcus Freeman eventually leaves, if we're talking about Mike Mickens kind of being to Marcus Freeman what Clark Lee was to Mike Elko. I could certainly see him being the next in line at defensive coordinator, whether that's Marcus Freeman getting promoted to be Notre Dame's head coach or Marcus Freeman getting a head coaching job somewhere else. That's the kind of confidence I have in Mike Mickens to coach that up, which ties into the John A1's previous question. Okay. I'm back. I don't know why that happens sometimes. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see here. Here we go. Peyton and Eli didn't even win natties. They have 2 Super Bowls each. If Peyton Manning would have played for Florida instead of Tennessee, Peyton Manning would have won a national championship. Championships are about our team things more first and foremost. Yes, you need great quarterback play. I would also argue that back then, great quarterback play wasn't quite as important as it is today. I think now you could win a title without a great quarterback. Tennessee did that with T. Martin, not Peyton Manning. But I think that kind of fit into just what was happening at that time, who Florida lost and where Florida was trajecting as a program more than it said anything about Peyton Manning. Same with Eli. I mean, Ole Miss isn't going to win a national title. The fact that he did what he did there was very impressive. But had they gone to different programs that were better than the ones they went to, they could have won national championships. And Notre Dame is that kind of program. But they also both won Super Bowls, especially for Peyton at a place that hadn't won a Super Bowl since what, the 60s or early 70s, something like that. So, yeah, they were champions. There's no question about it. Robert says, had Charlie Weiss had a defense like this in 2005 and 2009, could we have come close to a national championship? 2005, yes. Absolutely in 2005, because that was, in my opinion, the best offense Notre Dame has had since, of my lifetime. I can't think of an offense that was better than that 2005 offense. The defense cost them. Cost them the Michigan State game, it cost them the USC game, and it hurt them against Ohio State. They moved the ball pretty well against Ohio State in a lot of instances. They couldn't throw the ball, but the defense Ohio State destroyed that defense in the Fiesta Bowl that year. I would say the same thing about 2015, Robert. I think that if 2015 team had the defense that we've had the last couple of years, I think that Notre Dame 2015 team would have had a chance to win a national title. I think that was an elite offense. It wasn't always I absolutely think so. I mean, we've seen some times in the past where Notre Dame has had that offense. 2009, I wouldn't say 2009. The reason I say not in 2009 is because I don't think the Notre Dame offensive line was nearly good enough in 2009. And the fact that, Jimmy got hurt early and he was kind of immobile anyway, I think some of those top defenses would have been good enough to pressure him and rattle him, not rattle him like mentally, but just not let him get into rhythm and pick you apart. I think that was a major downfall of that 2009 team. I think the offensive line play wasn't nearly to the level that the 2005 line was when you had Ryan Harris, you had Mark LaVord, Dan Stevenson, Dan Santucci, John Sullivan. And that was a really veteran, experienced, just good offensive line that could protect Brady and could also open up, enough run lanes where Notre Dame, you had to respect Notre Dame's run game. I think Notre Dame's 2009 team had a great quarterback, in my opinion, had great wide receivers, had a very, very talented sophomore tight end in Kyle Rudolph. And the running back situation was good. Wasn't elite, but it was good. The offensive line wasn't close to what it was in 2005 or 2015. I think if you look back at Notre Dame the last 30 years, in my opinion, 25 years, in my opinion, the two teams that had the best chance to win a title were 05 and 15, 10 years apart. If you'd have given either of those teams a Clark Lee defense or the upcoming Marcus Freeman defense, I think those teams are good enough to win a national title. Tommy Leonard, hypothetical. What would Hamilton look like if he switched over to wide receiver? He'd be really good. I think Kyle Hamilton could do a lot of things at a very high level. Okay. Here we go. Notre Dame is one of the top academic business schools in the U.S. I wonder if their marketing school has had a hand in the pot of gold and targeted billboards. That's a good question, John. I'll look into that. And like I said, I think one thing Mike Elson's done a really good job with is he is trying to have the vision, but then finding people that can carry that vision out, which is I think what Mike Elson is doing with this recruiting campaign is probably the best resume builder for him if he ever wants to be a head coach, because a great head coach has a vision, and then you find competent people to carry that vision out at a high level. And I think that's what a head coach is supposed to do. All right. Notre Dame asks, do you see Lacey moving to 3 technique? I don't. I think what a better chance there would be that Howard Cross plays some 3 technique and Lacey stays at nose. I think the way this defense moves, I think Lacey's better at nose, but I think in theory he could play 3 technique. I just don't think that would be the move that we would go with. Okay, let's see here. John Climate, keep hitting the thumbs up, folks. Absolutely. I appreciate that very much. And I believe that is our last question. Now we have Michael Hughes has a comment. There's a reason Peyton Manning was notorious for dummy signals and changing his audibles. Players and coaches change teams all the time. Got to protect what you're doing. And absolutely right, Michael. Absolutely right. And so that's all I'm saying. I'm not accusing Dylan Gibbons of anything. For all I know, he may have burned his Notre Dame playbook so that this doesn't happen. All I'm saying is you have to assume as a coach that that's what happened and be prepared for it. And if you're not prepared for it, that's on you. That's not on Dylan Gibbons. So this was a great show today, everybody. I really appreciate it. John, here's a good one. This is a good one. John says, do you think Notre Dame can make the playoff with a loss to a non-elite team, no elite teams on their schedule? I think part of that depends on what happens with the rest of the country. But I would say yes. I don't think there's a whole lot of teams, period. And usually elite teams don't have losses. Nobody really beats those elite teams. So it doesn't really happen a whole lot. I think Notre Dame is going to have enough top 25 wins on their schedule. For example, this schedule to me is going to be a lot better than the 2019 schedule. Even though in 2019 they had a Georgia team that was probably ranked higher than anybody they're going to play this year. After that, it was a bunch of average stuff. I mean, their best win the rest of the year was Navy. This year, I think North Carolina is going to be a top 25 team. Cincinnati's going to be a top 25 team. I think Wisconsin's going to be a top 25 team. I think USC has a chance to be a top 25 team. I can see a team like Purdue being better than people think. I can see Georgia Tech being a bowl caliber team this year. I think Stanford has a chance to be better, although I'm not quite as sold on them because their quarterback situation is a concern. I could see Virginia Tech maybe being a little better. So I think the depth of the schedule could be good this year. Toledo could be one of the best teams in the MAC. You know, they could be a team that enhances Notre Dame's overall strength of record. So I think that this has a chance to be a challenging schedule, but to your point, there is no elite team on it. But I would say that we've seen Notre Dame in those situations before. I mean, 2015, for example, they lost to Clemson, and so they lost to one good team. They had a lot of good wins, though. So you point to that year and say, well, yeah, they won loss, but that one loss was to an elite team. So how's that going to be looked at? So you say, okay, Notre Dame doesn't really have a situation where you can compare it to. They lost to 2017, they lost to Georgia. But say, go back and look at the past years. I mean, Ohio State in 2014 loses to Virginia Tech and wins 7-6. They still made the playoff. And I wouldn't say that team had any elite wins. I mean, they beat Michigan State, who was decent, and Michigan, who was decent, but they didn't have any great wins. When you look at teams like I think at Clemson in 2016 didn't have a lot of great wins. Louisville was a really good win. Florida State was a decent win. They weren't any elite wins, but they were clearly a better team. I think if Notre Dame's going to make the playoff with a loss, they have to blow a lot of people out. And the loss has to, in my opinion, be early to middle of the season. And then when they play some of those better teams in the second half of the schedule, they have to be good. And I would say this, Jordan, I think Notre Dame is better off losing to not one of their best teams in the schedule. I think they'd be better off getting upset by like Purdue in the third game and then beating Wisconsin, beating Cincinnati, beating USC, and beating North Carolina, as opposed to, losing to one of those teams. Because I still believe the best way to the playoff is not to have a great loss, but it's to have bigger wins. I think that ultimately is what the committee has shown us. They're going to value your wins more than who you lost to. And I think we've seen plenty of playoff teams get in with a bad loss because they had a lot of good wins. And I do think Notre Dame may not have an elite win, but I don't know if there's going to be a lot of elite teams this year. I don't know how many teams are going to have elite wins. I think if you have a consistency over good teams, beat those good teams, and I think that's going to allow you to get in. John A1, these are the last two I'm going to take, and then we're going to get out of here. John A1 says, if Simon and Foskey break out, who's better in 2021? Foskey, clearly Foskey, just because of the nature of that position. And then the last one, the realist, LGND Killa says, who do you got? Notre Dame 2002 or Notre Dame 2012? I'd go with Notre Dame 2012. I think Notre Dame 2012 was a better defensive team. I think they were challenged more. I think the fact that they had to go on the road and beat Oklahoma, they had to beat a great top 10 Stanford team. I think the 2012 team gets a bad rap because of how that season ended. And you ask anyone associated with Notre Dame, there was so much behind the scenes stuff going involved. The Lene Kukui stuff had kind of started to percolate through the team. Manti was distracted. You had other things going on that team was distracted. That was not the same team we saw during the year. That was not the same team that we saw go on the road and beat Oklahoma. That was not the same team that we saw beat a really, really good Stanford team that year. That was a distracted football team. I think that was a much, much better team than that 2002 football team. I think 2012 was probably one of Notre Dame's 3 or 4 best teams of the last 30 years, and they get a bad rap because of how the season ended. That was a really, really good football team. It just, like I said, you're usually remembered by how your season ends, not what happens beforehand. And it's unfortunate that team isn't going to be remembered better. That was a great, great team. Everybody, thank you so much for being part of the show today. Before you leave, please hit the like button for us. If you're not a subscriber to our channel, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell so that you always get notified when these shows are up. If you're listening via podcast, we appreciate that very, very much as well. Make sure you subscribe to what we're doing. And as always, make sure you are locked into irishbreakdown.com. I thank everybody so much today for joining us. The people that gave super chats, thank you so, so much for supporting our channel financially. It means a lot to us, but it also means a lot to us that all of you spend your hard-earned dollars and your valuable time with us. And so we appreciate all the support, whether it's financial or whether it's with your time. It all is part of us building this Irish Breakdown Notre Dame community that you will all be part of the foundation of. So thank you so much for that. Everybody have a great rest of your Wednesday. Check out my midweek musings today at irishbreakdown.com. I think you're really going to enjoy that. I talk about the 7 sophomores not named Tyree, Mayer, or Lewis that I expect to have key roles this season. I talk about Notre Dame's preseason ranking or post-spring ranking on ESPN and CBS and how I think it's kind of nonsense. And then we have our running back big board video in there as well. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Talk to you all again very, very soon.